The wind howled through the alleyways of downtown Los Angeles, its icy fingers cutting through the fabric of Jack's tattered jacket. He huddled in a corner, trying to shield himself from the worst of the storm, but the cold seeped into his bones. His face, once full of life and hope, now carried the wear of years spent wandering the streets, chasing survival with no end in sight. Jack had been here too long, long enough to know the rhythm of the city, the faces of those who passed him by, and the distant hum of a world that seemed to move on without him. He watched as people walked briskly by, heads down, their lives moving fast while his own had come to a screeching halt. But today was different. Today, something changed. It wasn't the cold that gnawed at him. It wasn't the hunger. It wasn't even the loneliness, though it gnawed at his soul like a persistent ache. No, what had changed was the overwhelming sense of something important about to happen, something he couldn't quite grasp. What if this was the day? The day everything could finally turn around? Jack had spent so many nights wondering about that. What would it take for him to climb out of this hole? Was it even possible? The thought of getting his life back was a distant dream, almost laughable now. But then again, dreams were all he had left. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice. It wasn't the usual voice of someone telling him to get a job or get out of the way. This voice was different. It was calm, but it carried a weight of curiosity. "Are you Jack?" the voice asked. Jack looked up, squinting through the rain and mist. A man in a crisp, dark jacket stood before him, an umbrella barely keeping the worst of the storm off. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of recognition, like he'd seen Jack before. Jack wiped his eyes and nodded, unsure of what to make of this encounter. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" The man paused for a moment, as if considering his words carefully before he spoke again. "I have a proposition for you. Something that could change your life." Jack blinked, not sure whether he was hearing things. He had heard all sorts of promises in the past, people telling him that this or that could help him get back on his feet. Most of them were empty, hollow words. But this man didn't seem like the others. There was no pity in his voice, no judgment, just curiosity. "What kind of proposition?" Jack asked, cautiously. The man's eyes narrowed slightly as if he was assessing Jack, but his smile was genuine. "Elon Musk wants to meet you." Jack froze. Elon Musk? The billionaire? The guy behind SpaceX and Tesla? The name didn't seem to fit with the world Jack had known for so long. It didn't make sense. There was no way this was real. You've got to be kidding," Jack muttered, laughing bitterly. "What would he want with me? I'm nobody." The man didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice as if to make the moment more intimate. "That's what you don't understand. You're not nobody. You're someone he's been following for a while. He believes in second chances, Jack." Jack's heart raced. His mind swirled with confusion. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to cling to this lifeline, to believe that the world wasn't done with him yet. But how could it be possible? How could a man like Elon Musk, a genius, a visionary, want anything to do with him? The man in the jacket seemed to read his doubts. "I know this sounds crazy. I know it sounds like some kind of scam, but it's not. If you want to meet him, if you want a chance at turning your life around, all you have to do is come with me." Jack felt a cold shiver run down his spine, not from the storm, but from the weight of what the man had said. Could it really be true? Could Elon Musk, a man who had revolutionized industries and sent rockets to space, actually want to meet someone like him? A homeless man, sitting in an alley with nothing but the clothes on his back? He looked at the stranger, then down at his hands that had done nothing but beg for change and scrounge for food. His mind was spinning, but for the first time in years, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within him. "What do I have to lose?" Jack muttered to himself, the words barely a whisper. But then he looked up at the man again, this time with something resembling determination. "All right, let's go." The man smiled, and without another word, he turned and led Jack through the streets. For the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel invisible. He felt like something was about to change, like he was being pulled toward something big, something that could be the start of the rest of his life. As they walked, Jack couldn't shake the question that burned in the back of his mind. What would you do if you lost everything? The answer seemed to be unfolding before him. What would you do if you were in Jack's shoes? Would you take a chance on a mysterious opportunity, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jack's life hadn't always been this way. There had been a time, long before the streets of Los Angeles became his home, when his world had felt stable, when he was a man with a future, a family, and a career that had seemed limitless. He'd been born in the small town of Riverside, California, where he grew up with his parents, his older sister Rachel, and a younger brother, David. It was a tight-knit family, the kind where Sundays meant long meals at the kitchen table and weekends were spent camping or hiking in the nearby mountains. Jack had been the kind of kid who was always curious, always taking things apart to figure out how they worked. He had a natural talent for building things, for solving problems. It was no surprise to anyone when he earned a scholarship to study engineering at UC Berkeley. College had been a whirlwind. Jack had worked part-time at a local cafe to support himself while attending classes full-time. His professors noticed his potential early on, often pushing him to pursue internships with top tech companies. It was in his final year that he met Maya. She was studying computer science, and they hit it off almost immediately. She was smart, funny, and always pushed him to think outside the box. They made a great team, often collaborating on projects, and soon their relationship deepened into something more. By the time Jack graduated, he had landed a job at a prestigious tech firm in Silicon Valley, and Maya, too, had found a position with a fast-growing startup. They were on top of the world, ready to take on whatever came next. For a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. They rented a small but cozy apartment in San Francisco, surrounded by other ambitious young professionals, and spent their weekends hiking, cooking meals together, and making plans for the future. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. Jack remembered the day the tech bubble burst like it was yesterday. The news came in waves, firms collapsing, layoffs left and right, stock prices tanking. His company was one of the first to cut back, and Jack was among the casualties. It wasn't just a blow to his career, it was a blow to his identity. For years, his worth had been tied to his job, his achievements, and his role as a provider. Losing it all felt like being thrust into a dark, endless abyss. Maya had been supportive at first, but the pressure of uncertainty wore on her. They had to downsize their apartment, move to a cheaper neighborhood, and Jack had taken up side jobs, doing freelance work wherever he could find it. The stress mounted, and so did the arguments. Maya had always been the more practical one, and as Jack struggled to find his footing, their relationship began to fray. The stress, the insecurity, and the financial strain took a toll, and before long, Maya had packed her things and left. The day Maya walked out of their apartment was the day Jack felt his world crumble beneath him. It was the final blow that sent him spiraling. The next few years were a blur of failed attempts at getting back on track, jobs that didn't pan out, interviews that ended in rejection, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what went wrong. Eventually, Jack found himself in a downward spiral he couldn't escape. The combination of depression, isolation, and financial ruin led him to a place he never imagined he'd be, living on the streets. No family to turn to, no friends who understood, and a growing sense of hopelessness that seemed to eat away at him. The city, which once felt like a place of opportunity, now felt like a labyrinth of cold, uncaring streets. For the next few years, Jack drifted through various parts of Los Angeles, sometimes staying in shelters, sometimes just finding a quiet alley to sleep in. His dreams, his hopes of a future, became distant, blurry memories. He was a shadow of the person he used to be, a man who had once believed he could conquer the world with his ideas, now reduced to begging for spare change. But there were still moments, fleeting, brief moments, when something deep inside him stirred. Sometimes, when the sun was setting and the city looked more like a painting than a place, Jack would remember what it felt like to have ambition, to have a purpose. He remembered what it was like to be loved, to be seen. It was in these moments that the smallest flicker of hope would rise inside him, only to be quickly extinguished by the weight of his reality. And so, Jack lived like this, day after day, his existence reduced to a struggle for survival. He had come to accept it. He had to. There was no alternative. But that was before the man with the umbrella walked up to him in the rain. Jack's thoughts came back to the present, the memory of the strange encounter with the man still fresh in his mind. He had offered Jack something he hadn't dared to dream of in years: hope. And, more than that, he had mentioned Elon Musk. Elon Musk. Jack's mind was still racing. The name seemed out of place, like a foreign concept in his world. What could Elon Musk, a billionaire and visionary, want with him? A homeless man. A man with no real future. A man who had failed. But as Jack sat there, his body still cold and sore from the storm, a thought crept into his mind, one that had never dared to take root before. What if this was his chance? What if, just maybe, this was the moment when his life could turn around? He had nothing to lose. His heart thudded louder in his chest. Could this really be happening? Could a man like Elon Musk actually want to help someone like him? The question lingered in the air as Jack stood up, brushing the dirt from his pants. He looked at the man in the dark jacket, still waiting for him to take the first step. "Well," Jack said, his voice steadier than he felt, "if this is my shot, I guess I'd be stupid to pass it up." The man's lips curled into a smile. "I thought you might say that." And with that, Jack's life, which had seemed destined to remain stagnant in the shadows, began to take a turn he couldn't yet fully comprehend. The man led Jack through the bustling streets of Los Angeles, weaving in and out of the crowds as the rain began to subside. Jack's mind was still spinning from the bizarre conversation he'd just had. The thought of meeting Elon Musk, the man who had changed the world with his innovations, seemed impossible. But there was something about the stranger, the calm confidence in his voice, the glint of sincerity in his eyes, that made Jack hesitate to doubt him. They walked in silence for a few blocks, Jack's thoughts racing. Why him? Jack had no idea why someone like Musk would be interested in him, a man who had hit rock bottom, who had spent so many years just trying to survive. He was nothing like the people Musk usually worked with: tech moguls, engineers, world leaders, innovators. And yet, here he was, being offered the chance of a lifetime. A chance to be seen, to be heard, to matter again. They turned onto a side street, and Jack's pace slowed as they neared an unassuming black car parked along the curb. It wasn't a flashy vehicle, but it looked expensive nonetheless, sleek and modern, a far cry from the worn-out buses Jack had taken to get around the city. "This is it," the man said, unlocking the car and opening the door for Jack. Jack hesitated. For a moment, the weight of the situation hit him. This was it. There was no turning back now. He had no idea where he was going, what to expect, or what would happen next. All he knew was that, somehow, in the last few minutes, his entire life had been flipped upside down. He slid into the back seat, feeling the plush leather beneath him, the warmth from the car's heating system already working its way into his cold bones. He looked up to see the man getting in the driver's seat. He didn't seem in a rush, but his expression was unreadable, as though he knew exactly where this journey was taking them, while Jack had no clue. As the car pulled away from the curb, Jack glanced out the window at the city, wondering what the future held. Could this really be happening? Could this stranger really be telling the truth? The thought of meeting Elon Musk felt like a dream. The city passed by in a blur. Buildings, streetlights, people walking on the sidewalks, and soon, the car was heading toward the outskirts of Los Angeles. Jack's heart pounded faster with each passing mile. He had no idea where they were going, but the scenery was changing. The familiar chaos of downtown had given way to quieter streets, larger estates, and sprawling lawns that felt far removed from the rough life Jack had known. The car eventually slowed, turning onto a long driveway flanked by towering gates. Jack's eyes widened. He recognized the place instantly. It was one of the mansions owned by a tech billionaire. The car stopped in front of the gates, and the driver reached forward to press a button. The gates slowly creaked open, revealing a sprawling estate bathed in soft light. As they drove through, Jack could see the outline of a massive house, modern, sleek, and minimalist. It was the kind of place that only someone like Elon Musk would own. Jack's nerves were on edge as they approached the front door, but the driver didn't stop. Instead, he drove around the back of the house, where a small, discreet entrance awaited them. The car came to a halt again. The driver turned to Jack, his face still expressionless. We're here. Please wait here. Jack's stomach twisted as he stepped out of the car. He could feel the weight of his past pulling at him, the doubt creeping in. Was he really ready for this? What if he wasn't what Musk was looking for? What if, in the end, he was just another broken dream? He stood for a moment, staring at the door to the mansion. Everything in his body screamed at him to run, to escape the uncertainty, to go back to the streets where everything was familiar, even if it was miserable. But a small part of him, something deep inside, urged him forward. He was here. This was happening. With a deep breath, Jack knocked on the door. The door opened almost immediately, and standing in front of him was a woman in a sharply tailored suit. She had a calm, professional air about her, but her eyes, sharp and discerning, gave Jack the feeling that she was sizing him up. "Mr. Jack Taylor?" she asked. "That's me," Jack replied, his voice trembling slightly. She nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Mr. Musk is expecting you." Jack followed her inside, feeling like he had just crossed into another world. The mansion was even more impressive up close. Modern art on the walls, sleek furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine, and an air of calm luxury that contrasted sharply with everything Jack had ever known. They walked through the house, passing large windows that offered panoramic views of the city below. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, his mind racing with questions. What was this all about? What did Elon Musk want with him? The woman led him to a small sitting room at the back of the house, a space that felt more intimate, less formal than the rest of the mansion. "You can wait here," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "Mr. Musk will be with you shortly." Jack nodded, still in disbelief. He sat down in one of the plush chairs, his hands resting nervously on his lap. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. He had no idea how long he'd be waiting, but the silence only heightened his nerves. Minutes felt like hours, and Jack couldn't help but wonder what Musk was expecting from him. Was he a test subject? A charity case? Or had he seen something in Jack that no one else had? Something more than just a homeless man on the street? The door opened again, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the doorway, was Elon Musk himself. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The man who had reshaped the world with his ideas, who had sent rockets into space and created electric cars, was standing right in front of him. Elon Musk extended his hand. "Jack," he said, his voice steady and calm. "It's good to finally meet you." Jack's heart raced in his chest as he stood there, facing Elon Musk, the man who had built an empire, revolutionized the electric car industry, launched reusable rockets, and now, maybe, was about to change Jack's life. It was surreal. For a moment, Jack couldn't find his voice. The man in front of him was nothing like what he had expected. Elon Musk wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Instead, he was dressed simply in a gray t-shirt and jeans, his sleeves rolled up to expose his arms. He looked approachable, normal, even, for someone with such an extraordinary reputation. But his eyes, sharp and focused, carried a certain intensity. It was the kind of gaze that made you feel like he could see through you, like he knew everything about you before you even said a word. "Jack," Musk repeated, his hand still extended. "It's good to finally meet you." Jack shook Musk's hand, still processing the enormity of the moment. The grip was firm, but not overpowering. A handshake that felt like it could either be a beginning or the end of something. Yeah, good to meet you too," Jack said, his voice coming out a little shakier than he intended. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "I still don't know how this is happening. I mean, why me? I'm just a guy who's been on the streets for years. I don't get it." Musk studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if considering his words carefully. "You'd be surprised how many people I've met who've been through similar struggles. I know what it feels like to hit rock bottom, but what matters more than where you start is where you go from here." Jack blinked, processing the words. Musk had said it casually, but there was an edge of sincerity that made Jack pause. He had no idea where this was leading, but the sheer weight of Musk's presence made it clear that this conversation was something far beyond a simple meeting. "You've been through a lot," Musk continued. "I know that. But I also know that you've got something others don't. I've been following your story for a while. Jack's stomach flipped. My story? He couldn't believe it. I'm nobody. A homeless guy begging on the street. What could I possibly have that someone like you would be interested in? Musk smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you get from someone trying to appease you. It was the smile of someone who saw something deeper, something beyond the surface. It's not just about your situation, Jack. It's about the way you've handled it. I know your story isn't just about falling down. It's about getting back up, over and over again. Most people would have given up a long time ago, but you haven't. And that's the kind of resilience that interests me. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't thought of it that way. The constant struggle to survive. He had never really stopped to think about what it said about him. To him, it was just life. But hearing Musk put it into words made it feel like there was something bigger at play here. So, what does this all mean? Jack asked, his voice quieter now, tinged with hope. I mean, what do you want from me? Musk took a seat across from him, his posture relaxed but purposeful. I want you to help me with something. Jack's brow furrowed. Help you? With what? I'm working on a project. It's something big, something that could change the world. And I need people who understand what it's like to have nothing, to be at the bottom, and still find the strength to keep going. That's where you come in. You've got experience in surviving against all odds. I'm building a new initiative, something that could revolutionize how we think about social entrepreneurship. And I want you to be a part of it. Jack sat back, trying to process what Musk had just said. A part of him wanted to laugh. He had spent years on the streets, a man with nothing but the clothes on his back, and now, Elon Musk was offering him a chance to help change the world? Wait, are you serious? Jack asked, his voice incredulous. You want me to join some big project of yours? I don't know the first thing about running businesses or changing the world. Hell, I barely know how to take care of myself. Musk's expression softened. Jack, the world needs people who think differently. People who aren't jaded by the system, who haven't been molded into thinking there's only one way to succeed. People like you, who've been through the worst and still have hope. They're the ones who can see things others can't. Jack shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around what Musk was saying. He had lived his entire life being told that he wasn't enough, that he had failed. And now, this man, one of the richest and most influential people in the world, was telling him that his experiences, his struggles, were valuable? This is crazy, Jack muttered, looking down at his hands, calloused and worn from years on the street. I've never done anything like this. I wouldn't even know where to start. Musk leaned forward, locking eyes with Jack. That's the point. You don't have to know how to start. You just need the drive to want to make a change. We'll teach you everything you need to know. You'll be part of a team that's going to change lives. But it starts with you. Your willingness to take a chance. To believe in yourself again. For a moment, Jack couldn't speak. The weight of what Musk was offering hung in the air between them. Was this real? Was this his chance to finally escape the cycle of failure and pain? Or was it just another empty promise that would leave him even more lost than before? Musk watched him silently, giving him time to process. After a long pause, Jack took a deep breath, his mind still reeling. You really think I can do this? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I do, Musk said with absolute certainty. I don't offer opportunities like this lightly, Jack. You've got what it takes. You just have to believe it yourself. Jack stared at Musk, feeling something stir inside him. It was that same flicker of hope that he had buried for so long. For the first time in years, it felt like something was possible. Like he wasn't just a product of his failures. Like he could be more. All right, Jack said, his voice steady now, his gaze meeting Musk's. I'm in. What do I need to do? Musk smiled, the kind of smile that came with knowing that something big was about to begin. We'll start with the basics, Musk said, leaning back in his chair. But first, let me tell you about the team you'll be working with. They're not just tech people, they're problem solvers, innovators, people who understand that the real work is about making a difference, not just making money. As Musk began to outline the project, Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with disbelief. He had spent so many years wondering what his future held, wondering if he would ever get out of this dark place. And now, here he was, sitting in a mansion, being offered a chance to change everything. Jack had no idea what the future would look like. But one thing was for certain. His journey, which had seemed so hopeless, was just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. Jack's life, which had once been defined by uncertainty and despair, now seemed to be filled with an almost surreal sense of possibility. Musk had kept his word. He had arranged for Jack to meet with some of the brightest minds at his company, all working on the new initiative that promised to change the way society thought about homelessness and innovation. Jack had spent the first few hours with the team feeling like an outsider. Everyone around him was brilliant, focused, and had years of experience in their respective fields. He, on the other hand, was just a man who had lived on the streets. But Musk's words echoed in his mind. You've got what it takes. As the days went on, Jack slowly began to acclimate. He learned quickly, absorbing everything from the technical jargon to the broader vision of the project. The goal was clear: to develop a sustainable model that could provide not only shelter but also long-term opportunities for people who had fallen through society's cracks. A holistic approach that focused on education, empowerment, and creating pathways to financial independence for those who had experienced homelessness. It wasn't easy. Jack still had moments of doubt, times when he felt like a fraud sitting in meetings, discussing things he didn't fully understand. But then there were the breakthroughs, moments when something clicked. When Jack saw that his lived experience, the things he had gone through that no one else could truly understand, gave him an insight that no one in the room had. One afternoon, after a particularly intense brainstorming session, Jack found himself sitting alone in a quiet corner of the office, staring out at the city skyline. His mind was racing. The project was progressing, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of his head, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that this venture, this life-altering opportunity, was teetering on the edge of something. The pressure was mounting, and it wasn't just from the weight of the project itself. There was something else, a feeling that the promise of a fresh start, of a new life, was about to come to a head in a way he hadn't anticipated. Just as he was about to pick up his phone to call his old friend Rachel, the door to the office opened, and Elon Musk stepped in. "Jack," he said, his voice calm but carrying an urgency that made Jack's heart skip a beat. "We need to talk." Jack stood up immediately, a sense of unease creeping over him. "Is everything okay?" Musk's expression was unreadable. He motioned for Jack to sit. "Something has come up. Something that could affect everything we're working on." Jack's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? Is the project in trouble?" Musk didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down across from Jack, folding his hands. "A few days ago, I got a call from someone very close to the project, a key backer. They're starting to have second thoughts. They're questioning whether this is the right direction to take. There's a lot of pressure coming from higher-ups in the industry. They want quicker results, more profit, less idealism." Jack's heart sank. "So, they want to scrap it? All of it?" "Not yet," Musk replied, leaning forward. "But they want to make major cuts. Focus on the tech, the apps, the efficiency. Forget about the social aspect. They want a model that's more about data and less about people." Jack's mind spun. Everything they had worked toward, everything that had started to feel meaningful, now seemed like it was on the verge of being destroyed. Musk had promised that this initiative would be different, focused on real change, real solutions. But now, that vision was being threatened by the very people who were supposed to support it. "But we can't just change everything for profit," Jack said, his voice trembling. "That's the whole point. We were trying to build something that would actually help people like me, not just turn it into another business. If we start cutting the heart out of it, what's the point?" Musk's gaze softened, but there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I agree, Jack. I do. But sometimes, when you're dealing with people who control the purse strings, you have to play the game a little differently. And if we want to keep this project going, if we want to have a chance at seeing it through, we might have to compromise." Jack felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. He had fought for so long just to survive, just to stay afloat in a world that had no place for him. Now, just when things were starting to change, It seemed like the same forces that had kept him down were going to crush this opportunity, too. No, Jack said firmly, shaking his head. I can't be a part of something that's just going to turn into another corporate machine. You're right, there are ways to make money in this industry. But we're talking about real lives. People who have been ignored for so long. You can't just throw them away when the numbers don't add up. Musk's eyes locked onto Jack's, and for a long moment, there was silence. Finally, Musk stood up, his expression unreadable. I'm not going to give up on this, Jack, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. But you're right. If we compromise on the mission now, we'll lose everything we're trying to build. This has to be about the people. We can't just make it another tech startup. I'll fight for it, but I need you to be with me in this. Jack stood as well, his heart pounding in his chest. The choice was clear now. He could walk away, return to the streets, where at least things were familiar, where he knew how to survive. Or he could take a stand, risk everything, and fight for the change they had started to build together. He looked up at Musk, seeing the determination in his eyes. It was a rare moment, two people, from completely different worlds, facing the same impossible decision. I'm with you, Jack said, his voice steady. We can't back down now. Not after everything we've started. Musk smiled, a look of relief passing over his face. I knew I could count on you, Jack. As Jack walked out of the office that afternoon, his mind was a whirlwind. There was no turning back now. The stakes had been raised. This was more than just about helping people. It was about standing up for what was right, even if it meant fighting against the tide. Jack's heart raced as he stepped out into the warm evening air. This was it, the turning point. The challenge ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a challenge he was ready to face. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was fighting for something bigger than himself. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that away. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of action, tension, and hard decisions. Jack had made his choice, and now there was no going back. He had committed himself to this cause, to the vision Musk had shared with him. A future where homelessness wasn't just a statistic, but a crisis solved with innovation, empathy, and real opportunity. But the road ahead was anything but easy. Musk, Jack, and the team had to confront a wave of pressure from powerful backers who wanted quick results, profit, and an abandonment of the social mission that had been at the heart of the project. The stakes were high, and the risk of failure loomed over them every day. Jack could feel it all. The weight of responsibility, the fear of failure, the pressure to deliver results. But he wasn't alone. The team, though initially skeptical of his unconventional background, had come to trust him. They saw in him not just a survivor, but someone who could bring a new perspective to the table, someone who truly understood the problem, not just from a theoretical standpoint, but from the raw reality of lived experience. Musk, too, had become a pillar of support. Jack had seen a side of him that few others had, determined, yet vulnerable, passionate, yet aware of the risks involved. Musk was willing to fight for the vision, no matter the cost. But as the project gained momentum, the external pressure intensified. The backers wanted more concrete results, faster. They demanded that the initiative pivot towards a more profitable model, one that would cater to the wealthy elite who could afford high-tech solutions, leaving the most vulnerable behind. It was a gut-wrenching decision. Jack had seen firsthand how the system worked, how the poor and disenfranchised were so often left out of the conversation. And now, he was being asked to choose between staying true to the project's original mission or compromising to meet the demands of those with the power to fund it. It wasn't just a professional decision. It was personal. Jack had seen how homelessness could strip away a person's dignity, hope, and future. He couldn't, in good conscience, be part of something that perpetuated that cycle. One late evening, as Jack sat in a conference room overlooking the city, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The team had gathered to discuss the latest developments. Musk had called for a meeting with the investors, and tensions were high. The time had come to make a final stand. Jack, Musk said, sitting down across from him, I know this isn't easy, but we have to ask ourselves, what are we really trying to build here? Is this just another business venture, or are we trying to change lives? Jack looked at him, the reality of the situation sinking in. Musk wasn't just talking about profits or tech anymore. He was talking about purpose. The vision had always been bigger than just money. It was about creating a sustainable future for those who had been forgotten. Jack couldn't let that go. "I know what we're trying to do," Jack said, his voice steady but firm. "And I know what I've seen on the streets. The people who have nothing left. We can't just throw them away. Not again." Musk nodded, his face hardening with determination. "Then we fight. We're going to tell them that this vision, our vision, is not up for negotiation. It's not just about the bottom line. It's about doing the right thing." The meeting with the investors was scheduled for the following morning, and Jack felt a knot in his stomach. He wasn't sure how this would play out. The backers were powerful, and they held the purse strings. But Jack had come to realize that the only thing worse than failing was compromising his principles. He was ready to fight for what he believed in. The next day, the tension was palpable as Musk, Jack, and the rest of the team sat across from the investors in a sleek boardroom. The room was filled with high-powered suits, executives, financiers, people who knew how to make money and drive results. They were used to getting their way. They were used to pushing people around. But today, they were up against something different. They were up against a cause. "I appreciate your time," Musk began, his voice calm but unwavering. "But we've reached a critical point. We've listened to your concerns, and we understand the importance of profitability. However, this project is about more than just money. We are committed to a vision that addresses the root causes of homelessness and provides real, sustainable solutions for people who need it the most." The lead investor, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s, leaned forward, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Elon, we understand your passion, but we're talking about a multi-million-dollar investment here. We need to see results. We need something that scales quickly. We can't afford to lose money on a project that doesn't generate immediate returns." "I understand the pressure," Musk replied, his gaze unwavering. "But what we're asking for is time. Time to build something that works. Time to prove that what we're doing here isn't just a social experiment, it's a solution. This project will change the world, and it will change the way we think about poverty and homelessness." The room fell silent as the investors exchanged glances. Jack could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he refused to look away. This wasn't just about a business deal. It was about the lives of real people, people who had been ignored for far too long. Finally, one of the investors spoke, his voice measured but stern. "You're asking us to take a risk, Elon, and we don't do risk without seeing the numbers. Show us the projections. Show us how this will scale, how it will turn a profit. Then we'll talk." Musk nodded. "We'll show you. But understand this. If we compromise on our mission, if we let profit dictate every decision, then we won't be building a solution. We'll be building another problem." The tension in the room was thick, but there was a shift in the air. The investors could sense Musk's resolve, and they knew that this was more than just a fight for profits. This was a fight for something bigger, something that couldn't be bought with money alone. After a long pause, the lead investor leaned back in her chair and let out a heavy sigh. "Fine, we'll give you time. But the clock is ticking. We expect results, Elon." Musk's expression softened just slightly. "Thank you." As the meeting concluded, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of relief mixed with the weight of what still lay ahead. The battle wasn't over, but they had won a small victory, a victory that would allow them to continue the fight. Walking out of the boardroom, Jack felt a strange sense of clarity. The fight was far from over, but he had made peace with his choices. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. In the days following their victory in the boardroom, Jack found himself standing at a crossroads. While the approval from the investors meant they could continue pursuing the project's original vision, the path ahead wasn't any clearer. The real work was just beginning. Every day felt like a battle not just against the external forces of corporate interests and investor pressure, but also against internal doubts and fears. Jack wasn't a corporate strategist. He wasn't a tech guru or an industry leader. He was a man who had lived through the pain and isolation of homelessness, and now he was trying to help others escape that same fate. But how could someone like him, someone who had spent years on the streets, understand the complexities of scaling an ambitious social initiative? It was a question that gnawed at him in quiet moments, and yet, every time he walked into the office, Surrounded by the brilliant minds working on the project, he felt a deep sense of purpose. These were the moments when Jack remembered why he had chosen this path. Because he had been given a second chance, and he knew that he couldn't waste it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and negotiations, Jack decided to take a walk to clear his head. The city's lights sparkled against the night sky, a reminder of both the vibrancy and the fragility of the world around him. Jack found himself at the edge of a park, the same park where he had spent countless nights as a homeless man, waiting for the sun to rise and bring him another day of survival. Now, as he sat on a bench near the fountain, watching the lights of the city shimmer, the contrast was stark. The park looked the same, full of life, full of people moving through their own routines, but it also looked different. The sense of danger that used to hang in the air when he had walked these streets was gone. He had his footing now, and with it, the sense of hope that had eluded him for so many years. But it wasn't just his own journey that weighed on his mind. It was the faces of the people he had known on the streets, the people who hadn't had the same luck, the same chance. People like his old friend Rachel, who had drifted in and out of shelters, never finding a permanent solution to the chaos of her life. People like Tom, who had died on a cold night, a victim of an overdose that no one had been able to prevent. What would happen to them? What would happen to the thousands, maybe millions, of people who were still out there, struggling to survive? Jack's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. "Jack, I need to talk to you. Can we meet tomorrow? It's important." His heart skipped a beat. The last time Rachel had texted him with a message like that, it was because she had relapsed into old habits, and Jack had spent hours trying to pull her out of the spiral. But this felt different. He could sense it in the message, the urgency, the weight of something unspoken. He quickly typed back, "Of course, I'll be there. Just let me know where and when." The following afternoon, Jack met Rachel at a small cafe, tucked away on a quiet corner of the city. As he walked in, he spotted her immediately, sitting by the window, her eyes fixed on the street outside. Rachel had always been a little different from the others he had met on the streets. She had a sharp mind, a quick wit, and a kind heart. But the system had worn her down. It had stripped away the confidence she once had, leaving behind someone who was just trying to get by. Jack sat down across from her, giving her a smile, though he could tell she was troubled. "What's going on, Rachel?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't been sleeping. "Jack, I don't know how to say this, but I need help. I've been thinking a lot about what you're doing, about the project with Elon Musk. I don't know how to make it happen, but I think it could really help people like me. People who don't know where to turn next." Jack's stomach tightened. He had been bracing for another crisis, but this felt different. "What are you saying, Rachel?" She hesitated, her fingers nervously tapping the cup in front of her. "I've been trying to get clean, Jack. I've been in and out of shelters, but it's never enough. It's always temporary. I've always felt like I was one bad decision away from losing everything again." Jack reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "You're not alone in this, Rachel. You know that. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." Her eyes filled with tears. "That's the thing, Jack. I've been thinking about the project you're working on, and I think it could be the answer. But I don't know where to start. I don't know how to ask for the help I need." Jack could feel the weight of her words, the unspoken fear that lay beneath them. Rachel wasn't just asking for help. She was asking for a chance to rebuild her life, for an opportunity to escape the cycle that had trapped her for so long. "I think you're right," Jack said, his voice steady with conviction. "The project, it's not just about building something. It's about people like you, like me, who need to know there's a way out. We're going to make sure that people like us have a real chance. No more temporary fixes. We're going to create something that lasts." Rachel looked at him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Do you really think that's possible, Jack? Do you really think we can change things for good?" Jack smiled, the weight of the world on his shoulders, but for the first time in a long while, he felt certain of something. "I do. I really do. Do you believe that large-scale social projects, like the one Jack and Musk are working on, can really make a lasting difference in the lives of homeless individuals? Or is it just another temporary fix?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. The meeting with Rachel stayed with Jack long after they parted ways that day. As he made his way back to the office, his thoughts were consumed by the same question. Can they really make a difference? It wasn't that Jack doubted the power of the initiative. Far from it. He had seen, with his own eyes, what happened when a person was given a chance, a real chance. But the road ahead was full of hurdles. The question was not just whether they could get the project off the ground, but whether it could scale. Could they reach those who needed it most? Could they create lasting change? Jack walked into the office the next morning with a renewed sense of urgency. The team was already buzzing with activity, discussions about new technologies, data analytics, and partnerships with local governments and nonprofits. Musk was there too, as always, at the center of the storm, pushing the team forward with his visionary ideas. Jack wasn't sure where to start. There were still so many moving parts to the project, so many things to get right. But there was one thing he knew for sure. The personal connection, the human element, was what would make this initiative stand out. It couldn't just be about technology, or profits, or efficiency. It had to be about people, about the lives they could transform. Jack, Musk called, waving him over from across the room. Got a minute? Jack walked over, wiping the lingering doubts from his mind. Yeah, what's up? Musk was standing next to a whiteboard, his hands flying over it as he sketched out ideas. I've been thinking about how we're going to scale this thing. I mean, really scale it. So it doesn't just stay an idea but becomes something that impacts millions of lives. But we need partnerships. We need cities on board. We need the right organizations. And we need funding that aligns with our mission. What do you think? Jack looked at the whiteboard. There were notes scribbled everywhere, potential tech solutions, outreach programs, and a large section labeled Partnerships and Outreach. It was clear that Musk's mind was always several steps ahead. But Jack knew the one thing that mattered most. The people they were trying to help. I think you're right, Jack said. But it's not just about partnerships and money. We need to connect with the people we're trying to help. And I don't just mean offering them a place to stay or giving them a job. It's about showing them that they're worth something, that they belong. That's what we need to build, communities, not just shelters. Musk stopped mid-thought, his gaze fixed on Jack. You're talking about something deeper than just fixing a problem. You're talking about rebuilding trust, rebuilding people's lives from the inside out. That's a tough one, but I see where you're going. Jack nodded. Exactly. If we can't build a foundation of trust, then none of this matters. People who've been on the streets for years, who've been treated like they don't exist, they need to feel like they have something to offer, like they have a future. Musk leaned back, looking at Jack as if seeing him in a new light. All right, I'm on board. But this kind of approach requires a shift in how we think about success. It's not just about the numbers. It's about the lives we change. So how do we make it happen? Jack paused. This wasn't just a business proposal. It was a call to action, a challenge to rethink what success meant in the world of social impact. He wasn't just trying to sell an idea. He was fighting for something that could reshape the lives of people like him, people who had been forgotten by society. I think we start small, Jack said. We don't try to do everything at once. We focus on one community, one city, and we build from there. We build real relationships, we connect with local organizations, and we offer more than just a roof over their heads. We give people the tools to rebuild their lives. We offer education, job training, mental health support, whatever it takes. Musk's eyes narrowed, considering the plan. I like it. Focus on one city. Build a model that works and can be replicated. If we can prove it works in one place, we can take it anywhere. Jack smiled. This was the breakthrough moment. He had finally gotten through to Musk, and more importantly, he had an idea that felt real. They weren't just talking about technology or the latest business trend. They were talking about changing lives, one person at a time. In the weeks that followed, Jack became more deeply involved in the development of the project. He was no longer just a consultant or an outsider brought in for his perspective. He was becoming part of the team, working alongside Musk and the brightest minds in the tech industry to develop a scalable, sustainable model that could make a difference. They settled on a pilot program in a city that had long struggled with homelessness, San Francisco. The idea was to partner with local organizations, city leaders, and tech companies to build an integrated system that combined housing with the tools for long-term success, education, job training, access to healthcare, and mental health support. Jack was particularly focused on working with local shelters and outreach programs. He knew from experience that these organizations were often the unsung heroes, the people who did the real work on the ground, day in and day out, without the fanfare or recognition. They needed support, and they needed a model that didn't just treat homelessness as a problem to be solved, but as a human crisis that needed real, human solutions. But as the project took shape, new challenges began to arise. San Francisco's homelessness crisis was more complex than they had anticipated. The city was divided. There were those who supported the initiative and were eager to make a difference, and those who were deeply skeptical, concerned that the project wouldn't do enough or that it would be another failed attempt to fix a deeply ingrained problem. One evening, Jack attended a community meeting in the heart of the Tenderloin, an area known for its high rates of homelessness and poverty. The room was filled with local residents, activists, and city leaders, all of whom had strong opinions about the initiative. Jack stood up at the front, his heart racing. This wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't a meeting with investors or tech developers. This was a room full of people who had lived through the crisis, who had seen the broken systems, the failed solutions, and the empty promises. "I know you've heard it all before," Jack began, his voice steady but passionate. "The promises, the new ideas, the latest tech solution. But what we're building isn't just another program. It's not just about throwing money at the problem or offering temporary relief. It's about building something that lasts. It's about giving people like me a chance to show that we're more than the circumstances we were born into. We have worth, and we deserve to have our lives rebuilt, not just fixed." The room was quiet. Jack could feel the skepticism, the doubt hanging in the air. But he could also see something else, the flicker of hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "I'm not asking you to believe in this project because of its name or its technology. I'm asking you to believe in the people who will make it happen. People who have lived this, people who know the struggle, and people who want to help. I'm one of those people." He sat down, the silence stretching out before him. But then, a woman in the back stood up, and the room shifted. "I believe in you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I believe in this." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to build on. Enough to push forward. After that pivotal community meeting in the Tenderloin, the mood surrounding the project shifted. The energy in the air was palpable. There was a sense that something real was beginning to take shape. For Jack, it was more than just a project. It was a mission. The people of San Francisco had started to trust him, and that trust was the key to everything. But trust had to be earned, and Jack knew the road ahead would be tough. In the days that followed, he worked tirelessly alongside the team, meeting with local organizations, government officials, and activists to hammer out the specifics of the pilot program. Each conversation brought new insights, new challenges, and new allies. But every step forward felt like a small victory. They were about to launch a new initiative, one that combined housing with the necessary services for long-term success. It wasn't just about providing a roof over people's heads. It was about rebuilding lives from the ground up. Mental health support, job training, addiction recovery programs, and most importantly, access to community. For Jack, this was deeply personal. He wasn't just helping strangers. He was helping people who, like him, had been cast aside by society. He had been that person, the one who had fallen through the cracks, the one who no one cared about. But now, he had a chance to make a difference. One afternoon, Jack sat down with a few key members of the project team in a small office overlooking the city. There was a lot to figure out, but they had made incredible strides in the past few weeks. They had secured a partnership with several major tech companies, including one that would provide the digital infrastructure for the project, an app that would connect people in need with resources, services, and job opportunities. Jack was impressed with how quickly things had come together, but there was still a sense of urgency. The initiative was in its infancy, and there were still many unknowns. Could they really scale this to make a meaningful impact? And more importantly, could they ensure that the people they were helping wouldn't just be forgotten again in a year or two? Musk, ever the visionary, was pushing for bold solutions, but Jack kept reminding him of the human aspect, This couldn't just be about shiny technology or a quick fix. They had to build something that would last. And that meant getting the community involved every step of the way. Jack, I know you've been talking about community support, Musk said, tapping a pen against the table. But how do we make sure that we're not just providing housing? How do we make sure these people don't fall back into the same cycle? Jack leaned forward. It's not just about providing housing. It's about integrating them into society. We're talking about building relationships. People need to feel connected. They need to have a sense of belonging. You can't just give someone a place to live and expect them to turn their life around. That's where we've failed in the past. We need to provide them with a community, with real support. Musk nodded slowly. So, the infrastructure needs to go beyond just buildings and resources. We need a social framework, a network of people who help each other, who support each other. It's a different kind of social safety net. Jack smiled. Exactly. It's about community. It's about empowerment, not just charity. The team agreed. They spent the next few days refining the model, incorporating elements that would ensure people could rebuild their lives, not just survive. They would work closely with local nonprofits, churches, and grassroots organizations to ensure that everyone had access to the resources they needed to make a fresh start. A week later, they gathered in a community center in the Tenderloin to unveil the pilot program. The room was filled with residents of the neighborhood, some hopeful, some skeptical. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with an unspoken tension. This wasn't just another presentation. This was their future on the line. Jack stood in front of the group, his nerves barely in check. He was used to speaking in front of crowds, but this felt different. These were the people he had fought for, people who had been let down time and time again by empty promises. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but full of emotion. I know a lot of you have heard promises before. I've heard them too. But this is different. This is real. He paused, looking out over the room. What we're building isn't just a place to sleep. It's a new beginning. We're offering a chance to start over, not just with a roof over your head, but with real support. We're giving you the tools, the resources, and the most important thing, your dignity. You are not forgotten. You matter. The room was quiet, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Jack could see the skepticism in their eyes, but there was something else there too. Hope. Small, fragile, but present. Today, we're launching a program that combines housing, job training, mental health support, and a community network. We're doing this together, and we're doing it in a way that makes sure no one gets left behind. If you're willing to work with us, we'll give you everything you need to rebuild your life. And most importantly, we'll walk with you every step of the way. A woman in the back raised her hand, her voice shaking. Is this really real? Or is this just another program that will disappear in a few months? Jack nodded, acknowledging her question. I understand why you might feel that way. I've been where you are. But I'm here to tell you, we're not going anywhere. This is about long-term change. This is about making sure you have the support you need to live the life you deserve. There was a moment of silence. And then, slowly, one by one, people began to nod. They had heard the sincerity in Jack's voice. They had seen his commitment. I'm in, a man said from the back of the room. You have my word. Another person stood up, then another. Slowly, the room came alive with conversation, with questions and excitement. The pilot program officially launched 2 weeks later. The first phase of the project was small, but it made a real impact. Jack, Musk, and the team had worked tirelessly to ensure that the program offered not just housing, but a comprehensive approach to rebuilding lives. People were being connected with job training, mental health services, and educational opportunities. And perhaps most importantly, they were beginning to build relationships that offered them the support they had so desperately needed. It wasn't perfect. There were still hurdles to overcome, and the road ahead was long. But as Jack walked through the community center one evening, watching people engage with the resources, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. He was making a difference. They were making a difference. As the weeks passed, Jack could feel the weight of responsibility growing heavier with each day. The pilot program was officially underway, but it was still in its infancy, fragile, delicate, and constantly evolving. They had succeeded in securing the first few individuals for the program, But the true test was ahead. Could they really make a difference in people's lives? Could they overcome the deep skepticism that had kept many from trusting the system? The first few weeks brought their fair share of victories and setbacks. On one hand, they had successfully placed several people into the housing portion of the program. These were people who had been living on the streets for years, people who had spent more time in shelters than they had in homes. The housing was an immediate relief for them, but Jack knew that the true measure of success would come later. Could they hold on to the stability? Could they take advantage of the job training, the therapy, and the support they were being offered? But just as often as they saw triumphs, there were roadblocks. One of the first participants in the program, a man named Sean, struggled to adapt to the structure of the housing and support services. Sean had spent most of his adult life battling addiction, and although he had accepted the help, he found himself at odds with the rules of the program. He missed curfew one night, and the following day he failed to show up for the mandatory job training session. The cracks in his resolve were beginning to show. It wasn't long before Jack received a call from one of the social workers in charge of overseeing Sean's case. "Jack, I think we need to have a serious talk about Sean," the social worker said, her voice tinged with concern. "He's really struggling. I think he might fall through the cracks if we don't intervene soon." Jack felt his stomach drop. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing it so directly made him realize just how high the stakes were. "Give me a day. I'll speak to him personally," Jack replied, his voice firm but kind. "I'll go to his apartment myself." The next afternoon, Jack found himself standing outside one of the program's newly renovated apartments. The building was modest, but the units were clean, well-lit, and designed with a sense of dignity, far from the cramped, impersonal spaces often seen in traditional shelters. When Jack knocked on Sean's door, there was no answer. He knocked again, this time a little louder, and finally heard the shuffle of footsteps approaching from inside. The door opened to reveal Sean, looking haggard and disheveled, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't been sleeping. "Jack, hey," Sean said, his voice trailing off. Jack offered him a warm smile, but there was no denying the tension in the air. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Yeah, sure." Sean stepped aside, and Jack entered the apartment, which felt sterile and empty despite the efforts to make it feel like a home. There were no personal touches, no photos or decorations, just the bare essentials. Jack sat down on the couch, his eyes meeting Sean's. "How are you holding up?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, but he could tell from Sean's body language that things weren't going well. "I'm fine," Sean muttered, avoiding Jack's gaze. I don't know. This whole thing is a lot. It's too much. I thought I could handle it, but," he broke off, his frustration visible. Jack nodded, understanding. He had seen this before, during his own time in shelters. The cycle of hope followed by disappointment. The fear of failure that kept people from trying, even when they were given a chance. "Look, Sean, I get it. It's not easy, but I'm here to help. You're not in this alone. I was once where you are, but I got through it. I know you can too." Sean's eyes finally met Jack's, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of vulnerability in them. "I don't know if I can do it, Jack. I've screwed up too many times. I don't think I can stick to it." Jack leaned forward, his voice softer now. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. This program isn't about getting everything right on the first try. It's about progress. And even if you stumble, we'll be here to catch you. No one's going to give up on you." There was a long silence between them. Then Sean nodded slowly, as if considering Jack's words. "I guess I've never really had someone believe in me before. Maybe that's why I don't trust it." Jack's heart ached. "I know it's hard, but I do believe in you. I believe in all of you. And that's why we're doing this. We're not leaving anyone behind." Sean looked down, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "Okay, I'll try. I'll go back to the job training tomorrow." Jack smiled. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was progress. And sometimes that was all it took. In the following weeks, Sean began to show signs of improvement. He attended the job training sessions more regularly, and his participation in group therapy sessions increased. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And that, to Jack, was a victory. But while Sean's story was one of small triumphs, there were still larger questions lingering in the air. How could they make sure this wasn't just another temporary solution? How could they ensure that people like Sean and the many others in the program had the chance to truly rebuild their lives? One evening, as Jack sat with Musk in the project's makeshift headquarters, the conversation turned to scalability. "We're seeing some success, but it's still too small," Jack said, rubbing his temples. "We've helped a handful of people, but how do we ensure this model works across the country, in every city? How do we scale this to reach thousands, if not millions, of people?" Musk leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Scaling is always the hardest part," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But I think we're on the right track. The key is to start by focusing on a few cities, like we're doing here, and refining the model. Once we know what works, we can replicate it." Jack nodded. "But it's about more than just logistics. It's about culture. We can't just throw tech solutions at this. We need to make sure we're building a sustainable, human-centered system that empowers people." Musk was quiet for a moment, then he looked at Jack with an intensity that Jack had come to recognize. "I agree, and I think we have the right team to make it happen. It's going to take time, but we're going to keep pushing. We'll get there." Jack smiled. "Yeah, one step at a time." As the pilot program continued to grow, Jack and his team faced more challenges, some big, some small, but they remained committed to the core principle. They were not just providing shelter. They were providing opportunity. And slowly, they were beginning to prove that it was possible to build something that could last. Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride, but he knew the journey was far from over. They had only scratched the surface, and there was still so much work to do. But as he walked through the community center one evening, watching people engage with the services, connect with one another, and rebuild their lives, he knew one thing for certain. They were making a difference. And that was just the beginning. The success of the pilot program in San Francisco was slowly building momentum, and Jack felt a renewed sense of hope. The residents in the program were starting to feel the shift in their lives. There was something undeniable about the power of connection. Whether it was the connections to the community, to resources, or to the people who genuinely cared about them. And perhaps the most surprising connection was the one between people who had once felt completely isolated from society. Jack often found himself reflecting on the people in the program. He thought about Sean, who had been so unsure of himself, but was now showing up every day to job training. Jack remembered the woman, Mary, who had spent decades living in shelters, now attending therapy sessions and talking about her goals for the future. And then there was Carlos, a young man who had been out of work for years after losing his job and falling into addiction, but who had recently found a part-time job at a local cafe. These were small victories, but they were victories nonetheless. For the first time in a long time, Jack believed that real change was possible. But as Jack and the team were starting to feel the excitement of seeing these changes, they were also confronting an unexpected challenge: the media. It wasn't long before news outlets caught wind of the new program, and like any big story, it quickly became the subject of intense scrutiny. Some outlets praised the initiative, calling it a model for addressing homelessness in cities across the country. Others, however, were more skeptical. They questioned the long-term viability of the project. They wondered if Jack and Musk were simply chasing a feel-good headline rather than addressing the systemic issues that had caused homelessness in the first place. The media backlash was swift, and it was hard to ignore. Journalists began showing up at the community center, interviewing residents, some of whom were unsure about the program and reluctant to speak publicly. Some questioned whether the services were adequate, whether they were truly equipped to address the mental health and addiction issues that plagued so many in the program. Jack knew this was a pivotal moment. If they were going to prove that their approach could work, they would have to do it under intense scrutiny. One evening, as Jack was reviewing some of the media coverage at his desk, he received a call from an unexpected source, Elon Musk. "Jack, how's it going?" Musk's voice crackled through the phone. "I've been better," Jack said, rubbing his eyes. "We're getting some bad press. Some of it's constructive, but a lot of it feels like they're just waiting for us to fail." Elon paused for a moment. "That's to be expected. Change scares people, especially when it challenges the status quo." "I know," Jack replied, "but it's hard to keep pushing forward when the media is framing it all as a temporary fix. We can't afford for people to think we're just throwing resources at a problem without real solutions." Let me tell you something, Musk said, his tone shifting to one of firm conviction. The world doesn't change without disruption. People will always resist change, especially when it challenges their preconceived notions. We knew going in that this wasn't going to be easy, but I trust you, and I trust the team. We'll weather this storm, Jack. If anything, this is a sign that we're onto something big. Jack appreciated the reassurance, but he also knew they couldn't afford to just ride out the negative press. I get it, but we need to be proactive. We need to show them that this is more than just an experiment. How about we host a public event? A showcase of sorts, where people can see the results for themselves. We can invite the media, key stakeholders, and the public. Let them talk to the residents, hear their stories. Show them the human side of this. Jack's eyes lit up at the idea. That could work. It could humanize the program, make it harder for them to dismiss it. Exactly, Musk said. I'll handle the logistics. You focus on the people. Show them the real impact. Don't let them focus on the noise. The following week, Jack and Musk put their plan into motion. They decided to hold a public event at the community center where the residents in the program could meet with the press, share their stories, and demonstrate how the program was helping them turn their lives around. The event was meticulously planned. Invitations were sent to journalists, local politicians, and influencers in the social impact space. The venue was buzzing with activity as the day of the event approached. Staff members were putting finishing touches on the space, arranging tables, setting up microphones, and preparing materials for guests. But even with all the preparations, Jack couldn't shake his nerves. Would the residents be willing to open up? Would they be able to share their journeys with the media without feeling vulnerable or exposed? The morning of the event arrived, and the community center was filled with an energy that Jack hadn't felt in a long time. The residents were ready. They had come a long way since the program began, and now they had a chance to tell their stories. One by one, residents took the stage. Some shared their struggles, their setbacks, and their victories. Sean spoke about his journey from addiction to recovery and how the job training had given him the confidence to start over. Mary talked about the therapy sessions that had helped her address the trauma she'd carried for years. Carlos spoke about the part-time job he had at the cafe and how it felt to be able to contribute again. Each story was different, but they all shared one common thread. The program had given them the opportunity to build a new life. As the residents shared their stories, the room grew quiet. Even the skeptics in the audience couldn't help but feel moved by the sincerity and courage of the people who had taken a chance on the program. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he didn't talk about the logistics or the details of the program. Instead, he spoke from the heart. We've heard a lot about the challenges, and we've heard a lot about the triumphs, Jack said, looking around at the faces in the room. But what this program really represents is hope. Hope for people who have been cast aside, forgotten by society. People who have been told they don't matter. We're here to show them that they do. And we're not just helping them survive. We're helping them live. There was a long pause before the applause began, and Jack felt a deep sense of relief wash over him. The press and the public had seen the impact, and it was undeniable. The event proved to be a turning point. The media coverage shifted. The skeptical reporters were forced to reckon with the real stories of real people who had found a second chance. Jack knew that the road ahead was still long, and the project was far from perfect, but for the first time, it felt like they were truly being seen. In the weeks that followed, the program continued to grow. More people signed up, and more partnerships were formed. There were still hurdles to overcome: funding, scalability, and the complexities of dealing with people's individual needs. But Jack could see the possibility now. They were on the right path. And maybe, just maybe, they had the chance to change the way the world viewed homelessness. Do you think that showing the personal stories of people involved in a program can change public opinion about homelessness? How important is it to humanize the issue and create personal connections in order to inspire long-term change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As the months passed, Jack's optimism about the program's success began to blend with a growing sense of pressure. The public event had been a resounding success, and media coverage had taken a positive turn. Yet, behind the scenes, the reality of scaling such an ambitious program was starting to weigh heavily on him. The system was stretched thin. The early successes were undeniable, But Jack knew they could not afford to rest on their laurels. There were still so many moving parts, and so many challenges still loomed on the horizon. The funding, while solid for now, was tenuous. Investors had begun asking harder questions. How sustainable was the program? Could it be replicated in other cities? And the deeper, more unsettling questions were those Jack struggled to answer. What happens when someone in the program fails? And what would happen when the media inevitably shifted its attention to the inevitable setbacks? One particular afternoon, Jack sat at his desk, scanning through a report from one of the social workers in charge of a group of new residents. The numbers weren't looking good. While many people were still showing up for therapy and job training, there was a growing number of participants who weren't engaging as expected. Some were even slipping back into old habits: substance abuse, dropping out of training, or simply disappearing. Jack leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He had seen this before, in shelters and recovery programs. It wasn't easy to rebuild a life. People failed. They relapsed. They lost faith. And the system had to adapt to handle that. But the pressure was mounting, not just from within the program but from the outside world as well. "Jack, we need to talk," came a voice from the doorway. It was Claire, one of the program's lead social workers. Her expression was serious, and Jack could tell she was concerned. "Of course, Claire. Come in," Jack said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. She sat down, her posture tense. "It's about the new group we've brought in. We're seeing a rise in drop-offs. People aren't showing up for their sessions. Some are even skipping the housing check-ins. And one of our guys, Dave, he relapsed last night. He's back on the street." Jack's heart sank. Dave was someone he'd spoken to just a few weeks ago. A young man with a lot of potential, a lot of pain, but also a spark of hope. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Claire sighed deeply. "Bad. He's been avoiding us since the relapse. I'm worried we've lost him for good." Jack's thoughts raced. How could they let that happen? The whole system was built on the idea of second chances, of rehabilitation, of hope. But Jack knew from experience, sometimes those second chances didn't work out. "I'll go see him," Jack said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "I'll talk to him. Maybe we can get him back on track." When Jack arrived at the location where Dave had been staying, an old, run-down shelter just on the outskirts of downtown, he immediately knew something wasn't right. The streets were eerily quiet, and the air had a heaviness to it, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Jack had been to places like this before, where the lines between desperation and hopelessness blurred. He felt it now in his gut. Jack entered the shelter and found Dave in a corner, slouched on an old, worn-out couch. The familiar signs of substance abuse were there: red eyes, a faint smell of alcohol and sweat, and the hollow expression that accompanied someone lost in their own pain. Dave barely looked up when Jack approached. "Dave," Jack said softly, sitting down beside him. "How are you doing?" Dave shifted uncomfortably. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice rough. "Just leave me alone." Jack didn't move. "We were worried about you. You're part of something bigger now, you know? This program, this whole community. We've got your back. But you have to show up for yourself too." Dave let out a bitter laugh. "Show up? For what? What's the point? I've tried. Man, I've been trying for years. And look where it's gotten me. I'm back here again. Nothing changes." Jack could feel the frustration bubbling up inside him, but he kept his voice calm. "I know it's hard. I know it feels like you've hit a wall, like it's all too much. But Dave, what if this time could be different? What if this time you didn't have to do it alone?" Dave shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe it's just too late for me." Jack sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of Dave's words sink in. He'd heard it before, too many times. "It's too late for me." But Jack refused to accept that. Not for Dave. Not for anyone in the program. "I'm not giving up on you," Jack finally said. "And I'm not going to let you give up on yourself either." Dave looked at Jack, his expression softening just a little. "I don't know if I can trust it. This whole thing. It just feels like another promise that's going to fall apart." "I get it," Jack replied. "You've been hurt before. You've been let down. But this isn't just about promises. This is about actions. And we're doing everything we can to make sure you have what you need to succeed." But you have to take that first step. There was a long silence. Jack could see the conflict in Dave's eyes. The desire for change, the fear of failure, the reluctance to try one more time. It was all there, tangled together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dave spoke. "Okay, I'll try. I don't know if I can make it, but I'll try." As Jack left the shelter that day, he felt a sense of relief, but also a gnawing anxiety. Dave had agreed to try again, but Jack knew the real work was just beginning. The program was at a crossroads. They couldn't afford to lose anyone. They had to figure out how to address the deeper issues, the root causes of addiction, mental illness, and long-term homelessness. Back at the community center, Jack and his team gathered for a meeting to address the growing concerns. There was no denying that the program had made progress, but the challenges were becoming more apparent. They had to scale faster, adjust to individual needs more effectively, and ensure that every participant had the support they needed to stick with it, even when they felt like giving up. "How do we keep people engaged when they start to slip?" Claire asked during the meeting, echoing a sentiment that had been weighing heavily on Jack's mind. "We have to dig deeper," Jack replied. "We can't just provide housing and job training. We need to make sure every person feels like they're part of something. We need more intensive outreach. We need to strengthen the mental health and addiction support, and we need to create a deeper sense of community." Musk, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Jack, I think you're onto something. The key is connection. People aren't just struggling because they don't have a roof over their head. They're struggling because they feel disconnected from society, from hope, from purpose. If we can fix that, then we've got a shot at making this work long-term." Jack nodded. "Exactly. We've got to make them believe they matter." The road ahead would be tough, and Jack knew there were no guarantees. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of the program's potential. They were doing something revolutionary. And even though the challenges were growing, he knew that the only way forward was together. It had been weeks since Jack's conversation with Dave at the shelter. Jack had kept his word and remained involved in Dave's recovery, visiting him regularly, talking through the setbacks, and encouraging him to keep going. Yet, despite Jack's unwavering commitment, Dave still seemed stuck, caught in a cycle of hope and despair. For every small victory, like Dave showing up to therapy or attending job training, there was a setback. He'd often relapse, retreating back into old habits, isolating himself. Jack had seen it happen too many times before, but he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when so many others, like Dave, were fighting for a second chance. As the program continued to grow, the pressure mounted. They were receiving more applicants, but the resources needed to support them were starting to stretch thin. The staff was doing everything they could, but there were only so many hours in a day, and only so many hands to go around. The program had started to feel like a balloon, one that was being inflated faster than they could patch up the holes. But there was also something in the air, something tangible that kept Jack going. The residents of the program were starting to see real change in their lives. Sean had found a full-time job at a local warehouse. Mary had reconnected with her estranged daughter, and Carlos had been promoted to a management position at the cafe. These were small victories, yes, but victories that told Jack they were headed in the right direction. Still, the question loomed. How could they sustain this? Could they expand without sacrificing quality? Could they actually change the future for these people, or would the system inevitably swallow them whole? One morning, as Jack sipped his coffee and glanced through the program's reports, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "Dave disappeared. We think he's back on the streets again." Jack felt a tightness in his chest. Not again. He quickly gathered his things and headed out. When Jack arrived at the shelter, he found Claire in the office, her face tense. "We've been trying to reach him, but we haven't been able to. He's not answering his phone, and his bunk is empty. We've got a bad feeling about this. Do you know where he might have gone?" Jack asked, his voice calm, though his heart was racing. Claire shook her head. "He wasn't supposed to be on the streets. He agreed to stay in the program. I don't know what happened." Jack closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. Dave was one of the first residents who had truly connected with the program. His failure would be a heavy blow, not just for him, but for everyone involved. It was more than just losing a participant. It was a reminder of how fragile everything was. But Jack wasn't willing to let Dave slip through the cracks. Not without a fight. "Let's check the usual spots," Jack said. "He'll be hiding somewhere, trying to avoid us. He's not going to want to admit he's back on the streets." Claire nodded, and they immediately began their search. Hours later, they found him, sitting on the cold concrete steps of an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. Dave was staring blankly into space, his clothes ragged and his face drawn with exhaustion. The once bright spark of hope in his eyes was now dimmed, replaced by something darker. It was as though the weight of failure had completely crushed him. Jack knelt down beside him. "Dave, it's me." "Jack." Dave didn't respond at first. His eyes were unfocused, lost somewhere far away. "Dave," Jack said again, a little firmer this time. "Talk to me, man. What happened?" For a long time, there was nothing. Then, finally, Dave's voice broke through the silence. "I tried, Jack. I really did. But I can't. I don't know how to keep going." Jack's heart tightened as he sat beside him. "I know it's hard, but you've made it this far. Don't throw it all away now. I know you can do this." Dave shook his head. "You don't get it. I've been failing my whole life. Nothing works. Nothing ever sticks. What's the point of trying?" Jack's mind raced. He had heard this kind of self-talk before. The deep sense of worthlessness, the despair that told them their efforts were futile. But Jack knew better. The point is that every single day is a new chance. Every setback is just a part of the journey. You're not failing, Dave. You're learning. This is hard. There's no denying that. But you've come too far to give up now. Please don't quit on yourself. For a moment, there was silence. Dave seemed to be mulling over Jack's words. Then, slowly, he nodded, though the uncertainty in his eyes remained. "Okay," Dave said quietly. "Okay, I'll try again. But I don't know if I can make it." Jack placed a hand on Dave's shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. We're here, Dave. You don't have to figure it all out today. Just take the first step. That's all we need." After that conversation, Dave agreed to come back to the program. It wasn't an easy decision, and Jack knew it would take time. But it was a victory. A small one, yes, but one that had a ripple effect. Jack knew this would be a long road, but they had the foundation in place. They had the right people, and they had the resources. But as Jack returned to the community center, he knew there was more work to be done. The program was expanding, but so were the challenges. They couldn't afford to lose anyone, and yet, it felt as if the weight of their mission was becoming heavier by the day. In the days that followed, Jack made a plan. It was clear that in order to make this program sustainable, they needed to take a step back and rethink their approach. They couldn't just throw resources at the problem. They had to get to the root of it. Jack called a meeting with Musk. The program was starting to feel like it was hitting a wall, and they needed fresh ideas. They needed to find ways to provide more personalized care, more consistent engagement. They couldn't just provide shelter and job training. They needed to address the emotional and psychological wounds that had led people to homelessness in the first place. Musk listened intently, as always. "What you're saying makes sense," he replied. "We've created a foundation, but now we need to dig deeper. I'm all in. Let's make sure we're not just solving the problem temporarily. We need a solution that lasts." Jack felt a surge of hope. He wasn't in this alone, and he wasn't about to let the program fall apart. It would be a long road, but he knew they could create real, lasting change. For Dave, for the others, and for everyone who needed a second chance. The following weeks were filled with both breakthroughs and setbacks. Jack found himself walking a tightrope, balancing the ever-expanding demands of the program with the deep, sometimes heartbreaking struggles of the people it was meant to help. The pressures to succeed felt heavier each day, especially as new applicants flooded in, all desperate for a chance at a better life. The system they had put in place was solid, but it was becoming clear that to truly make an impact, they needed to go beyond just providing resources. They needed to give people the tools to rebuild not only their lives, but their very sense of self-worth. Dave's return to the program had been rocky, but Jack had seen small glimmers of hope. He was showing up more regularly, attending therapy, and engaging in group discussions. Still, the fear in Dave's eyes, the doubt that clouded his every action, was palpable. He was still fighting the battle inside, the one that told him he wasn't enough, that he'd failed too many times to count. But Jack had learned something over the past few months. The fight wasn't over until they gave up. So, Jack kept pushing, encouraging, and believing, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. One afternoon, Jack was sitting in the community center's main meeting room, reviewing the latest intake reports, when Claire entered. Her face, usually calm and composed, was lined with concern. "Jack, we need to talk," she said, her voice unusually tense. Jack looked up from the papers, sensing the weight behind her words. "What's going on?" "It's Dave. He's not doing well," Claire said, sitting down beside him. "He's been skipping his therapy sessions, and he hasn't been showing up for the group meetings. I think he's on the verge of relapsing again." Jack's stomach tightened. "Where is he now?" "We don't know. He hasn't been answering his phone or showing up at his bunk," Claire replied. "I'm worried he's back on the streets." Jack stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. "We have to find him." Hours later, Jack and Claire were once again walking the streets, searching for Dave. They checked the usual spots, the rundown shelters, the abandoned alleyways, and even some of the nearby parks. But there was no sign of him. Just as Jack was starting to feel a growing sense of panic, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the other staff members. "We found him. He's at the old diner on 5th Street. Jack exhaled with relief. "We found him. Let's go." The diner was a grim place. It had once been a thriving local spot, but now it was little more than a faded relic, with cracked windows and a peeling sign. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and grease. The booth where Dave sat was tucked in a corner, his face buried in his hands, shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear from the world. Jack and Claire approached slowly. When Dave looked up, his eyes were hollow, filled with shame. He looked smaller than Jack remembered, defeated, drained. "I don't want to go back," Dave said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep doing this. It's too hard." Jack sat down across from him, trying to keep his tone gentle. "I know it's hard, Dave, but this isn't about going back. It's about moving forward. You don't have to do this alone." Dave's eyes welled up, but he quickly wiped them away. "I'm tired of failing. I thought I had a chance, but I keep screwing up. I don't belong here. I don't deserve this." Jack's heart ached as he listened. The old wounds, the abandonment, the rejection, were still so fresh in Dave's mind. His sense of self-worth had been shattered too many times for him to believe in the possibility of change. "You deserve this, Dave. You deserve to be here. You've already taken the hardest step, admitting you need help. That's the hardest part," Jack said, his voice firm but compassionate. "And you don't have to do it alone. We're all here for you. The program, the team, the other residents. We're a community. You belong here. And we're not giving up on you." For a long moment, Dave remained silent, his hands trembling slightly as he stared down at the table. Then, slowly, he looked up at Jack. "But what if I fail again?" Jack leaned forward, his eyes locking with Dave's. "What if you don't? What if this time is different? You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to take the next step. Just keep showing up. Keep trying. We'll be here every step of the way." Dave stared at him, searching Jack's face for any sign of doubt. When he didn't find any, he let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging as if a small weight had been lifted. "I'll try," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can make it, but I'll try." Jack smiled, relieved. "That's all I ask, Dave. One step at a time." Over the following weeks, Dave began to show signs of progress. He attended his therapy sessions more consistently, and he started engaging in group activities again, though it was clear he was still battling his inner demons. But there was something different about him now, a quiet resilience that Jack hadn't seen before. It wasn't just about overcoming addiction or finding a job anymore. It was about finding the strength to believe that he deserved a second chance and that there was a place for him in this world. Meanwhile, the program itself was evolving. Musk's input had been invaluable. He had provided new technologies for tracking the program's progress, and his team had introduced a digital platform that allowed residents to access job training, therapy sessions, and community resources at the touch of a button. The program had also incorporated a mentorship component, where people who had been through the process could support newcomers. But even as the program expanded, Jack was keenly aware of the challenges they faced. Each success story felt like a small miracle, but the larger issues remained: sustainability, funding, and finding ways to reach more people without compromising the program's integrity. Still, there were moments of pure clarity when Jack saw how much had already been accomplished. The walls of the community center echoed with laughter and conversations. Residents, who once felt invisible to the world, were now standing tall, taking pride in their new lives. And in those moments, Jack knew the program was worth every sacrifice, every doubt, and every setback. One evening, as Jack walked through the community center after hours, he spotted Dave sitting in a corner, talking to a new resident who had recently entered the program. Dave's voice was calm, encouraging, and filled with empathy. He wasn't just a participant anymore. He was a mentor, a living testament to the power of second chances. Jack watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. The road had been long and full of obstacles, but the people in this program, people like Dave, were proving that change was possible, no matter how hard the journey. Just as the program was beginning to find its rhythm, something unexpected happened. It wasn't just a breakthrough for Dave or for the residents, but for the program itself. It all started one late afternoon when Jack received a call that would alter the trajectory of everything they had worked so hard to build. The caller was from the office of Elon Musk. At first, Jack thought it was some kind of joke. He had been in touch with Musk's team before, but this felt different. He could hear the urgency in the voice on the other end of the line. The woman introduced herself as Megan, one of Musk's personal assistants. "Mr. Musk has been following your program closely," she said, her tone professional but warm. "He's been really impressed with the impact it's having, and he wants to meet with you to discuss how he can support your efforts moving forward." Jack's heart raced. Support the program? This was the kind of news he had only dreamed about. "Is this for real?" Jack asked, almost as if testing the waters, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. "Yes, absolutely," Megan replied. "Elon would like to schedule a meeting with you. He believes in the potential of what you're doing, and he wants to help it grow exponentially. Can you meet him tomorrow morning?" Jack was in shock, but he quickly gathered himself. "Yes, of course. I'll be there." The next morning, Jack found himself sitting in a sleek, high-rise office in downtown Los Angeles, staring at a massive glass table that seemed to reflect the entire city skyline. The space was minimalist but opulent, with a feeling of quiet power in every detail. Jack had been in boardrooms before, but this was different. This was the kind of space reserved for titans of industry, not a small-town guy running a homeless rehabilitation program. Within minutes, Elon Musk walked into the room, his presence magnetic. He was dressed casually, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. Without wasting any time, he shook Jack's hand, and they both sat down. "I've heard a lot about your program," Musk said, his voice calm but with an underlying energy that made Jack feel both excited and a little intimidated. "What you're doing is important. It's not just about giving people shelter, but about giving them the opportunity to change, to thrive. That's something I think we need more of in this world." Jack blinked, processing the weight of Musk's words. He actually gets it. This wasn't a business meeting where numbers were the primary focus. Musk was talking about something deeper, something that spoke to Jack's heart. It was about people, about purpose. It was about transforming lives. "I appreciate that, Mr. Musk. We've been working hard to build something sustainable, something that not only addresses immediate needs but also long-term recovery," Jack said. "But the truth is, we're at a point where we need more resources. We've got the foundation, but we can't keep up with the demand. The costs of scaling are enormous." Musk nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. I've been involved in a lot of ventures, and scaling something meaningful is always the hardest part. But that's where innovation comes in. We can apply some of the things I've learned in tech, in sustainable development, to this issue. This program doesn't just need more resources, it needs the right resources." Jack listened intently. "I agree, but the challenge is finding the balance. We don't want to lose sight of the human element. We can't just throw money at the problem and hope it works. We need a holistic approach: mental health support, job training, housing, and community building." "Absolutely," Musk said, leaning forward. his expression serious. The problem with most programs is that they treat homelessness as a one-dimensional issue. But it's not. It's about addressing the root causes: mental health, addiction, family dynamics, lack of opportunities. You're right to focus on the whole person. Jack felt a rush of hope. Musk wasn't just talking in vague terms. He seemed genuinely invested in finding a solution. "So, what's your plan?" Jack asked, the weight of the moment not lost on him. Musk smiled, the kind of smile that Jack had seen in interviews and public appearances. It was the smile of someone who had already made up his mind. "I want to help you scale the program, but I don't want to just write a check. I want to get involved in the strategy, bring in some of my teams to work on the logistics, the technology, the long-term sustainability. I'll cover the costs, but I'll also bring in innovation." Jack's mind raced as the enormity of what Musk was offering sunk in. This was more than just funding. This was a chance to change the entire landscape of homelessness support. The meeting lasted for hours as they discussed logistics, strategies, and potential obstacles. Musk had ideas that were unconventional, but Jack was starting to see how they could work. From leveraging Tesla's sustainable energy resources to implementing AI-driven systems for better resource allocation, Musk was already thinking of ways to integrate cutting-edge technology into the solution. By the end of the meeting, Jack was exhausted, but exhilarated. It wasn't just that they had a plan. It was that they had a partner who believed in what they were doing as much as Jack did. And that belief was worth more than all the money in the world. "I'm in," Jack said, shaking Musk's hand once more. "Let's make this happen." Back at the community center, Jack called Claire to share the news. When he told her about the meeting, she was in disbelief at first. "You're kidding, right?" she asked. "Elon Musk? Really?" "Yeah," Jack said with a laugh. "It's real. And he's committed to helping us grow. Technologically, financially, and strategically. We're going to scale this program in ways we never thought possible." As Jack spoke, he realized that this wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for everyone in the program. People like Dave, who had taken the first steps toward rebuilding their lives. People who were now being given a chance not just to survive, but to truly thrive. In the weeks that followed, the program began to grow exponentially. Musk's resources were injected into the operation, and the team worked tirelessly to incorporate new technologies and strategies. They built smarter, more efficient ways of tracking progress, offering personalized care, and ensuring that residents had access to the support they needed. Musk's innovation provided not only better living conditions for those in the program, but also a blueprint for expanding the model nationwide. Jack could hardly believe the speed with which everything was happening. He had come from nothing, an idea, a dream, and now he was at the helm of a transformative initiative that had the potential to change the future of homelessness in America. But even with all the progress, Jack knew that the work had only just begun. Scaling the program, ensuring its sustainability, and continuing to create real change for the people who depended on it. This was the long game, and he was ready for it. What role do you think innovation and technology can play in solving complex social issues like homelessness? How can we ensure that these solutions remain focused on the human element, not just the numbers? Share your thoughts below. Let's keep the conversation going. With the new partnership between Jack's program and Elon Musk, things began to move at a rapid pace. What had started as a small, local initiative to help people experiencing homelessness was quickly gaining attention far beyond the borders of Los Angeles. The resources that Musk brought in, everything from sustainable housing solutions to cutting-edge AI tools, was transforming not just the program, but the entire landscape of how homelessness was being addressed across the nation. But with this new spotlight came new challenges. The pressure to succeed had never been greater. The eyes of the country were on Jack's program. News outlets, reporters, and advocates from all corners of society were eager to see if this partnership could truly make a difference. One morning, Jack sat at his desk, reviewing the latest intake figures. The program had expanded dramatically, and more individuals were coming through the doors every day, many of them still skeptical that anything could change for them. They had seen programs come and go. They had heard promises, but they were accustomed to disappointment. Jack understood that. It was a deep distrust that ran through the core of many of the people he worked with. The phone on his desk rang, breaking his concentration. He picked it up. Jack, it's Claire. You need to see this. Jack sat up straight. Claire's voice was serious, and that was never a good sign. What's going on? There's a protest in front of the center. It's not what you think, though. It's about the tech. Claire's voice had a slight edge of concern. Some people are worried that we're focusing too much on tech and not enough on the human side of things. Jack sighed and rubbed his temples. He had known this day was coming. Any major shift in the way social problems were approached was bound to provoke pushback. But this felt different. He had always kept the human element at the forefront, but now, with the infusion of technology, he had to figure out how to balance both worlds. I'll be right there, Jack said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. When Jack arrived at the community center, a small group had gathered in front of the entrance. Some were former residents, others were local activists, and a few were just concerned citizens. They held signs that read, "Don't let tech take over our humanity," and "Technology is not the answer to homelessness." Jack walked over to the group, his heart pounding as he approached the small crowd. A woman, probably in her mid-30s, stepped forward and handed him a flyer. "We're not against progress, Jack," she said, "but we're afraid that tech will replace human connection. That people will be treated like data points, not people." Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their words. He understood their fears, even if he didn't fully agree with them. "I hear you," he said, speaking slowly. "The last thing we want to do is dehumanize anyone. Technology is a tool, but it's just that, a tool. The heart of this program has always been about helping people connect with each other, and it always will be. We're using technology to do things we couldn't before, like streamlining resources, tracking progress, and connecting people with jobs. But the relationships, the empathy, that will never change." The woman, whose name was Leah, nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. "But it's easy to get lost in the tech. What happens when the focus shifts to algorithms and efficiency over compassion?" Jack's mind raced. He had been thinking about this very issue since the partnership with Musk had started to grow. He knew that the fear of losing the human touch was a valid concern, especially in an age where automation was increasingly taking over the most intimate parts of life. "I promise you, Leah," Jack said, his voice steady, "we will never let go of the heart of what we do here. If anything, technology helps us focus more on people, not less. It gives us the freedom to do the one thing that matters most, listening to each person, meeting them where they are, and guiding them on their own path. The tech is here to support us, not replace us." Leah didn't respond immediately, but Jack could see that she was thinking it over. The rest of the group stood quietly, waiting for her to speak. "You've got a point," Leah said after a long pause. "But we'll be watching. We won't let you forget the people." Jack smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way. You have my word." The protest didn't dissipate that day, but it did become clear that it wasn't an attack on the program itself. It was an expression of fear, a fear that something important was being lost in the drive for innovation. And Jack understood that fear. He had seen firsthand how easy it was to get caught up in the numbers, the systems, the grand ideas, without ever stopping to ask whether they were really helping the people they were meant to serve. For the next few days, Jack worked with his team to craft a response. They would keep the technology, but they would also reinforce the human side of the program. They held community meetings, invited people to tour the center, and showcased stories of success. Real stories from people like Dave, who had found hope and transformation through both the support of their team and the resources that new technology provided. The more they shared, the more the skeptical voices began to fade. It wasn't an easy battle, but Jack knew it was one worth fighting. This was the moment where he had to prove that they weren't just about growth. They were about sustainable, compassionate growth. As the weeks went by, Jack's program continued to expand. More residents found their way to the center, and with Musk's technological innovations, it became easier to track their progress. AI algorithms helped identify patterns in people's needs, whether it was addiction recovery, job placement, or mental health support, and could offer personalized recommendations. The data-driven approach didn't replace human care, but rather supplemented it, helping the staff to be more effective and targeted in their efforts. But despite all the technology, Jack still spent most of his time sitting down with residents, listening to their stories, offering advice, or simply offering a shoulder to lean on. There was no algorithm that could replace the comfort of a kind word or the strength of a relationship built on trust. One evening, Jack received a call from Dave, who had been in the program for several months now. The change in him was striking. He was no longer the desperate, hopeless man who had wandered the streets. Dave had found stability. He was working part-time at a local cafe, attending group therapy, and had even started mentoring newer residents. "Jack, I just wanted to thank you," Dave said, his voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd get out of the hole I was in. I thought it was too late. But you showed me that it wasn't. That I wasn't done." Jack felt his throat tighten. "Dave, you did the work. I just showed you the door. You walked through it." "I'm still walking through it," Dave replied with a chuckle. "But now, I'm not doing it alone." Jack smiled, knowing that this was why he'd started the program in the first place. To help people like Dave. To help them find their way back. Have you ever faced resistance to change or progress, whether in your personal life or in the world around you? How did you balance the old with the new, the human with the technological? Share your thoughts below, and let's continue the conversation. The success of Jack's program in Los Angeles was impossible to ignore. The numbers were staggering. Within the first few months of launching their partnership with Elon Musk, the program had helped hundreds of people transition from homelessness to stable housing and employment. Stories of transformation flooded the local media, and soon, Jack's humble initiative was becoming a model for how to address homelessness across the country. But with success came immense pressure. The demand for the program was growing exponentially, and Jack knew they had to scale quickly to meet the needs of other cities. The partnership with Musk was not just a lifeline. It was the catalyst for a nationwide movement. But there was a catch. Scaling the program meant replicating their model while maintaining the same level of personal care and attention that had made the program so successful in the first place. The challenge was daunting. Jack sat in his office late one evening, staring at the whiteboard covered in plans for the next phase of expansion. There were detailed proposals for new sites in Chicago, New York, and Miami. There were projections for staffing, logistics, and resources. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was missing. "Hey, Jack," Claire's voice broke through his thoughts as she entered the room. "I know you've been grinding away on the expansion, but how are you feeling about it?" Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I don't know, Claire. We've made so much progress, but scaling this thing to the level it needs to be, it feels like we're about to lose everything we've worked for." "I get it," Claire said, pulling up a chair beside him. "It's a huge undertaking, but you're not alone in this. We have the right people on our team, and with Elon's support, we have the resources. The big question is, how do we stay true to the heart of the program while we grow?" Jack nodded. That was the million-dollar question. The tech was invaluable. It helped manage resources, streamline services, and even predict future needs. But it could never replace the human connection, the empathy, that made the program special in the first place. "I don't want to turn into just another factory for fixing problems," Jack said, his voice heavy. "We can't lose the people, Claire. We can't just treat them as numbers on a spreadsheet." Claire reached across the desk, placing her hand on his. "And you won't. You've built this program with the foundation of real relationships. That's what makes it different from everything else out there." Jack smiled, appreciating the comfort she provided. "You're right. But we still need to figure out how to scale without losing that personal touch. If we can't figure that out, we'll be no better than the other programs out there that just focus on checking boxes." The solution, Jack realized, wasn't about making the program bigger in the traditional sense. It was about empowering more people to lead. It was about creating a network of leaders who shared the same vision for change. He needed to train local leaders in each new city to manage the day-to-day operations, while still maintaining a connection to the broader mission. He knew that they couldn't be everywhere at once, but with the right people at the helm, they could replicate the success of the Los Angeles program in other locations. Jack spent the next few weeks traveling to cities like Chicago and New York, meeting with potential leaders who could take on the challenge. It was a rigorous process. The candidates had to be more than just qualified. They had to embody the same values that Jack had instilled in the program from the beginning: compassion, determination, and a genuine desire to make a difference. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, miscommunications, and even moments of doubt. But Jack refused to give up. He had seen firsthand the difference that his program could make, and he was determined to bring it to more people, no matter how difficult the path. One day, as Jack sat in the back of a cab on his way to a meeting in New York, he received a call from Elon Musk. "Jack," Elon's voice crackled over the line. "I've been thinking a lot about the scale-up. We've been discussing ways to integrate even more technology into the program, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we keep the balance. I know you're worried about losing the human element, and I agree. I think we should focus on empowering local communities, bringing in local leaders who can keep that personal touch alive." Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him. Elon understood. He wasn't just offering money or resources. He was offering support in a way that would protect the integrity of the program. "I'm glad you're on the same page," Jack said. "That's the key for me, finding leaders who can bring the same heart to the program that we've established here in Los Angeles." "I'll help you however I can," Elon replied. "We'll make sure you have the infrastructure and the technology you need, but I'm with you on this. The people will always be the focus." By the end of the year, the program was up and running in 3 major cities: Chicago, New York, and Miami. It wasn't perfect. There were growing pains, logistical challenges, and moments when it felt like everything could fall apart. But Jack was confident. He had built a network of dedicated, passionate leaders who believed in the mission. The personal touch that had defined the program in Los Angeles was present in every new location. One of the key factors in making this work was the mentorship program. Each new city had a local leader who was trained by Jack and Claire, and they in turn mentored others. This approach ensured that the program wasn't just about a one-size-fits-all solution, but a locally driven, personalized approach to homelessness that adapted to the unique needs of each community. And with Elon Musk's continued support, the program had access to the latest in technology, sustainable housing, and job training platforms. They used AI to predict when someone might be at risk of relapse or homelessness again, and they offered resources and support before it became a crisis. One afternoon, Jack sat at his desk, looking at the progress reports from each of the cities. The numbers were impressive. Hundreds of people had transitioned from homelessness to stable housing and employment. More importantly, they had begun rebuilding their lives with dignity, hope, and a sense of purpose. Claire walked in, holding a coffee cup in her hand. "How are we doing, boss?" she asked, taking a seat. Jack looked up and smiled. "We're doing better than I ever thought possible. But this isn't just about the numbers, Claire. It's about the lives we're changing, one person at a time." Claire nodded, looking at the photos on the wall. Photos of former residents who had become mentors, who had rebuilt their lives. "It's all about those stories. Every one of those faces is a victory." Jack leaned back in his chair, a sense of fulfillment settling over him. "And there's so much more to do. This is just the beginning." With the expansion well underway, Jack found himself standing at the edge of something monumental. The program was no longer just a local initiative. It had become a symbol of hope, a movement for change, and an example of what was possible when communities came together to address one of the most persistent social issues of their time: homelessness. But with this scale came inevitable challenges. The rapid growth of the program was exhilarating, but it was also overwhelming. The financial demands were higher, the logistics more complex, and the expectations, both from the public and from their partners, were through the roof. In every new city, there were new sets of rules to navigate, new political landscapes to understand, and new community dynamics to respect. Despite the growing pressure, Jack kept his focus on the core mission. He knew the work wasn't just about numbers or expansion. It was about the lives they were touching. Every day, he received messages from people who had been helped by the program. Former residents who were now employed and living in stable homes, people who had regained a sense of dignity, and families reunited after years of separation. But for every success story, there were still dozens more people on the streets, each with their own story of hardship and struggle. The task ahead was daunting. Jack couldn't help but wonder, were they really making a difference, or just scratching the surface of a much deeper problem? It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when Jack received the call that would change everything. He was sitting at his desk, flipping through some reports from the New York branch of the program, when his phone rang. It was Claire. "Jack, we've got a situation." Claire's voice was tight. "A huge one." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He stood up, pacing the room. What happened? There's been a fire in one of the temporary shelters we set up in New York. It's bad, really bad. We lost the building, and we've got dozens of people displaced. Some are hurt. The local authorities are involved, and the media is already on it. This could set us back months. Jack felt his stomach drop. A fire was the last thing they needed, especially with the pressure mounting to expand further. But he had learned over the years that staying calm in moments like this was key. He took a deep breath. "I'll be there as soon as I can," Jack said, grabbing his coat. "Get me a report on the situation and tell the team to be ready. We'll handle this." Jack arrived in New York late that evening, his mind racing with the possibilities of what had gone wrong. The shelter, a repurposed warehouse that had been converted into temporary housing for people in the program, was no longer standing. A charred frame was all that remained, the scent of smoke lingering in the air. Police and fire officials were still on the scene, speaking with the program staff and the affected individuals. Claire met him on the sidewalk as he stepped out of the car. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. Jack nodded, though he didn't feel okay. "What happened?" "It seems like the fire started in one of the electrical units," Claire explained. "There were no casualties, but several people were injured from smoke inhalation. They're all in the hospital now, but the building is a total loss. We've already relocated everyone to nearby shelters for the time being." Jack exhaled slowly, relieved that no one had died, but it was still a setback, and one that couldn't be ignored. "Where are we with the insurance claim?" Jack asked, trying to keep his mind focused on the next steps. "We're waiting to hear back. The damages could take weeks to process, and we'll need to find new housing solutions for everyone displaced in the meantime." Jack rubbed his chin, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "This could derail everything we've built here. We can't afford to let the program stall, not when we're so close to real change." Claire looked at him, her eyes full of resolve. "We won't let it derail us. We'll find a way through this. We always do." Jack wasn't sure how, but in that moment, he knew she was right. They had overcome countless obstacles to get to this point. And while this new challenge was a major blow, it wasn't the end. It was just another hurdle. In the following days, Jack and Claire worked around the clock to coordinate the response. They arranged for temporary housing, reached out to the insurance company, and kept in close contact with the affected residents. The media coverage was intense, but instead of focusing on the disaster, Jack made sure the narrative stayed focused on the resilience of the people they were serving. Jack also took the opportunity to publicly call on Elon Musk and other corporate partners to help fund the rebuild. Elon, as always, was quick to offer support. He not only promised financial backing but also sent a team of engineers and architects to help design a more fire-resistant shelter that would be safer for the residents moving forward. As the weeks went on, Jack realized that this setback had actually brought the community closer together. The way the staff, volunteers, and even the residents themselves rallied to support each other in the face of adversity showed him that the program wasn't just a fix for homelessness. It was a movement built on human resilience. While the situation in New York was stabilizing, Jack took some time to reflect on the bigger picture. He knew that there would always be challenges, financial setbacks, political pushback, and unforeseen disasters. But it was the collective will of the people involved, those who were dedicated to seeing change, that would ultimately carry them through. One night, as Jack sat in a quiet corner of the New York shelter, he received a message from Elon. It was short and simple. "We're in this for the long haul. Don't forget that." Jack smiled as he read the message. In the chaos, it was easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. But Elon's words reminded him of why they were all doing this in the first place: to make a lasting, meaningful impact. By the end of the year, the program was back on track. The New York shelter had been rebuilt, stronger and more resilient than before. The residents who had been displaced were thriving, and the team had learned invaluable lessons about crisis management and recovery. What had once been a devastating blow had ultimately turned into a testament to the strength of the program and the people who supported it. As the year came to a close, Jack found himself in a reflective mood. They had faced challenges, setbacks, and heartache, but they had also seen incredible progress. The program had touched more lives than Jack could have ever imagined, and they were just getting started. Jack leaned back in his chair, looking out the window of his office, which now overlooked a transformed city. The skyline of New York sparkled in the distance, but it was the quiet, everyday moments, people working, families reconnecting, lives being rebuilt, that gave him the greatest sense of accomplishment. He had always known this was never going to be easy, but now, more than ever, he knew they were on the right path. And the road ahead, while uncertain, was filled with boundless possibilities. By the spring of the following year, Jack had witnessed the profound impact his program was having, not only on those who were directly helped but on entire communities. The media was buzzing with stories of transformation, not just from Los Angeles, New York, or Chicago, but from across the country. Local leaders in each city were taking ownership, tweaking the program to meet their unique needs, and bringing in even more individuals who were eager to make a difference. Jack had never imagined that a homeless shelter program would turn into something so much bigger, a nationwide initiative that inspired hope, empowered communities, and involved countless people in the process of change. What began as a partnership with Elon Musk had blossomed into a social movement that transcended the usual boundaries of charity work. But with this level of success came new, even more complex challenges. Jack and his team had learned valuable lessons from the fire in New York and the growing pains in other cities, but now they had to wrestle with something even more daunting: how to keep up the momentum, sustain funding, and continue to innovate without losing sight of the core values that had made the program so effective in the first place. One afternoon, Jack was in a meeting with Claire and the leadership team when the subject of long-term sustainability came up. "Jack, we've got to talk about scaling up further," Claire said, her voice measured but urgent. "We've seen remarkable progress, but we're also seeing a lot of pushback from city councils, especially in smaller towns. They don't have the infrastructure, and they're worried about their local resources being stretched too thin. What happens when we reach a plateau?" Jack rubbed his temples, knowing the weight of what Claire was saying was true. They had become a beacon of hope in large cities, but small towns and rural areas were different. The issues they faced: lack of affordable housing, fewer job opportunities, limited mental health resources, were harder to address with a one-size-fits-all approach. "We need to rethink how we approach this," Jack said, leaning forward in his chair. "It's not just about adding more locations or more money. We have to involve the communities in the process more directly. We can't just be an outside force coming in. We have to empower the people already living there to take ownership of the program." Claire nodded. "You're right. But what's the first step? How do we do that?" That night, Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had always been the kind of person who believed in the power of local solutions. When he had started this journey, he never intended to be the face of the movement forever. His ultimate goal was always to build a sustainable model that could run on its own, without him constantly at the helm. But now that the program was gaining more recognition, he realized that there were layers to this problem he hadn't fully anticipated. The next day, Jack called Elon. He had a plan. "Elon, we've got a new direction in mind. We want to focus on localizing the program even more," Jack began, pacing around his office as he spoke into the phone. "Instead of just expanding to new cities, we want to partner with community organizations and local leaders in smaller towns and rural areas. We want to teach them how to run their own initiatives with the resources we can provide." "Sounds like a solid plan," Elon replied, his voice calm but engaged. "But what kind of support do you need from us?" "We need more than just funding," Jack said, his voice gaining confidence. "We need technology and training. A network that's scalable but flexible. One that's rooted in the communities we're helping, not imposed from above. The key is giving people the tools, not the answers." "Understood," Elon said. "We've got the tech side covered. Let's focus on building an infrastructure that works in both urban and rural settings." Jack's pulse quickened. This felt like the turning point. With Elon's backing, they could create something that wasn't just a patchwork of solutions, but a long-term, adaptable system. Over the next few months, Jack and Claire began building what they called the Community Leaders Program. The idea was simple but ambitious: train local leaders in smaller communities to manage the programs with the same level of dedication and care that had made the urban program successful. They would provide these leaders with the technological tools they needed to track progress and share resources, but the rest would be up to them. These community leaders would be the key to sustaining the program's values. They began with pilot projects in a few select towns in Texas, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, places that had expressed interest in tackling homelessness but had limited resources. Jack and Claire personally met with the local leaders, who were often people with deep roots in the community: teachers, church leaders, local activists, and social workers. They helped these leaders understand the framework of the program while emphasizing that they would have the autonomy to adapt it to their local needs. The results were almost immediate. In Michigan, a former high school teacher, Lisa, used her connections to local businesses to create a job training program for homeless individuals, while in Texas, Pastor Mark integrated the program with the services his church had already been providing, ensuring that it wasn't just about housing but about healing the whole person: body, mind, and soul. In Pennsylvania, community organizations came together to address the issue of mental health, providing counseling and therapy services for individuals struggling with addiction or trauma. These localized solutions were not only sustainable but incredibly effective because they were born out of the needs and realities of the communities themselves. As the pilot programs expanded, Jack found himself more hopeful than ever before. This model, one that empowered local leaders, tailored to regional needs, and backed by a robust support system, had the potential to transform how homelessness was addressed across the country. But this success didn't come without hurdles. Some leaders struggled with the technical aspects of managing the program, and others faced significant pushback from local governments or law enforcement. These challenges were frustrating, but they were also part of the process. The team had learned that they couldn't just bring in solutions and expect them to work seamlessly. They had to continuously evolve, learn from mistakes, and adapt their approach. Jack was reminded of how far they had come. There had been times when the weight of the work felt unbearable, when he wondered if the program would ever reach the scale they hoped for. Yet here they were, pushing forward, one small community at a time, creating a ripple effect of change. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jack sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had happened. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Claire, holding a file in her hands. "I've got something you need to see," she said, smiling. She handed him the folder, and Jack opened it to reveal a letter. It was from a family in Texas whose father had been part of the program and had successfully turned his life around. "We just wanted to thank you," the letter began. "You didn't just give us a house, you gave us a future. Our dad is back with us now, sober, employed, and hopeful. We've never seen him like this before. Thank you for changing our lives." Jack's heart swelled. He didn't need any more proof. This was it. This was why they did what they did. "Every story counts," Jack whispered to himself as he stared at the letter. Claire nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment. "We're making it happen, one life at a time." The ripple effect of their work had begun to touch every corner of the country, one step at a time. And though the road ahead was still long, Jack knew that together, they could transform the lives of thousands, even millions. The program wasn't just a solution to homelessness. It was a movement that could change the fabric of communities, build hope, and inspire the kind of change that could last for generations. It was a warm summer evening when Jack received the news that he had been both dreading and anticipating. The program had officially reached a new milestone. A national summit would be held to discuss the future of homelessness and the role their initiative would play in it. The event was going to bring together not only the local leaders they had been working with, but also key policymakers, corporate leaders, and activists from around the country. As Jack read the invitation, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was a rare opportunity to shape the national conversation about homelessness and its solutions. The program had already sparked significant change at the local level, but this summit represented something larger, something that could affect policy, change laws, and perhaps even redefine the way society viewed and treated homelessness. But as much as Jack felt excited, there was a part of him that was nervous. The program had grown far beyond what he had ever expected. It had become not just a series of shelters but a symbol of something far more profound. A new approach to societal problems, one rooted in empathy, community, and collaboration. How would they measure up to the high expectations? Would the summit be a springboard for further growth? Or would it put them under an even brighter spotlight, where failures could be more easily scrutinized? Jack arrived at the summit early, scanning the conference room as attendees filtered in. It was an impressive crowd: government officials from several states, representatives from influential corporations, nonprofit leaders, and journalists. Elon Musk, as expected, had sent a representative to speak on his behalf. Jack had learned to appreciate Elon's no-nonsense approach to business and innovation, but at the same time, he knew Elon's presence, even remotely, carried immense weight in the room. His endorsement had turned the program into a household name and helped bring about the kind of attention it now commanded. As Jack took his seat at the head of the table, he noticed a woman walking toward him. She was tall, with a commanding presence, wearing a sharp suit and glasses. He recognized her immediately: Senator Margaret Collins, one of the most vocal advocates for homelessness reform in Washington. "Jack," she greeted him with a warm handshake. "I've heard a lot about your work. It's truly impressive." "Thank you, Senator," Jack replied, his nerves rising a little. "It's been a challenging but incredibly rewarding journey." "You're about to face some big questions today," Senator Collins said, a knowing look in her eyes. "But if anyone can handle it, it's you. You've created a model that's starting to get noticed. People want to know how it works. They want to know if it can scale. And they want to know if it can survive in the long term." Jack nodded, trying to mask the nervousness creeping in. He had been working on the program for years, and yet, the pressure of the summit felt different. It was one thing to work in a local community. It was another to present the solution on a national stage. As the summit began, Jack and the other leaders on the panel discussed everything from funding models to community involvement, to the critical importance of mental health services for homeless individuals. The conversations were insightful, but the most important moment came when Jack was invited to speak. Standing at the podium, Jack cleared his throat, the spotlight warming his face as he scanned the audience. He had been in front of crowds before, but this felt like something more. It wasn't just about convincing people that homelessness was a problem. It was about convincing them that their solution could work. It was about changing minds and inspiring action. "I want to start by saying this: homelessness is not a permanent state. It's a circumstance," Jack began, his voice steady. "The people we work with are not defined by their current situation, and neither should we. The issue is complex, but it's not insurmountable. We have the tools to solve this. What we need now is the collective will to make it happen." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "The program we've developed is not just a series of shelters. It's a model that can empower communities. It's about giving people the tools to rebuild their lives, not just providing a temporary solution. It's about creating a support system that works for everyone. When we give people access to housing, education, job training, and mental health services, we create a cycle of opportunity that doesn't just end when someone moves into a new apartment. It's a cycle that lasts." As Jack spoke, he could see the faces in the audience change. Some nodded in agreement, others took notes. There were even a few skeptical looks, but Jack welcomed them. This wasn't about telling people what they wanted to hear. It was about laying out the truth and showing that change, real change, was possible. "We've had our setbacks. We've faced fires, funding shortfalls, political opposition. But I stand before you today with one simple message: homelessness is not a problem we have to accept. It's a problem we can solve. Together." Jack ended his speech to a round of applause, feeling both relieved and energized. But as he sat back down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The real work would come in the weeks and months ahead, as policymakers, businesses, and communities weighed in on what it would take to take this model to a national level. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and negotiations. Some were encouraging, others less so. But throughout it all, Jack remained focused on the bigger picture. The program had touched enough lives that it was impossible to ignore the momentum it had generated. People were waking up to the reality that homelessness wasn't just an issue of poverty. It was a human rights issue that required collaboration, compassion, and most importantly, action. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with government officials, Jack stepped out into the quiet of the hotel courtyard. He needed a moment to himself. The summit had been productive, but it was also exhausting. There was so much to do, so many questions still unanswered, and so many obstacles ahead. As he sat on a bench, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "We're getting some real traction back home. People are talking about the summit, and our work is resonating with more leaders than ever before. Don't lose sight of what we've built." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Despite the pressure and uncertainty, the program had reached a place of genuine respect and recognition. And that wasn't something he could take for granted. He stared out at the stars above and whispered to himself, "We're just getting started." The next day, Jack and Claire were invited to a private lunch with some of the most influential leaders in the country: activists, business moguls, and philanthropists, people who were eager to help bring the program's vision to life. As they sat down, Jack felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He wasn't alone in this fight. More and more people were waking up to the reality of homelessness and the collective responsibility they had to solve it. Elon Musk's representative, who had attended the summit virtually, also joined them, bringing the support of his company once again to the table. This wasn't just about financial backing. It was about creating lasting change through innovation and collaboration. "Jack," Elon's representative began, "I've been thinking a lot about your vision. This isn't just about scaling a program. It's about creating a new way of thinking about community, a way that uses technology, compassion, and local leadership to tackle problems at the root level. We want to help make that vision a reality." Jack felt a wave of gratitude and determination wash over him. The summit had been an enormous success, not just because of the conversations that had taken place, but because of the connections that had been made. Connections that would drive the program's future forward, giving it the support and resources it needed to make a lasting difference. As Jack returned to his hotel room that afternoon, he took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He thought back to the early days when the program was just an idea, when he had struggled to convince others that homelessness could be solved. And now, it was no longer just his idea. It was the idea of thousands of people, volunteers, business leaders, activists, and most importantly, the individuals who had lived through the experience of homelessness and were now contributing to the solution. The road ahead was still uncertain. There were battles to be fought, barriers to be broken, and obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, Jack knew one thing for sure. The ripple effect of compassion and collaboration had begun, and it was only going to get stronger. What do you think is the key to creating lasting, meaningful change in your community? How can we use innovation and collaboration to solve the toughest problems we face? Share your thoughts below. It was a crisp autumn morning when Jack stood in front of a crowd in downtown Los Angeles, facing a city skyline that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. He took a deep breath, allowing the cool air to fill his lungs as he prepared to address the audience at the official launch of the Homeless Empowerment Movement, a national initiative designed to scale the program and address homelessness in a way that was rooted in community-driven solutions and innovation. The morning sun illuminated the faces of thousands who had gathered, from volunteers and business leaders to local government representatives and advocates who had supported the movement from the beginning. There were even a few faces Jack recognized from the earliest days of the program. The woman from Michigan who had helped integrate job training into the community program, the church leaders from Texas who had ensured their shelter was a safe haven for those who sought more than just housing, and the community organizers from Pennsylvania who had worked tirelessly to bring mental health care to those in need. The stage was set, and Jack could feel the weight of everything that had led him to this moment. The program was no longer just a local initiative. It had become a national movement, and with it came a new responsibility: to ensure that every step forward was sustainable, every decision grounded in the values that had made the program successful from the start. Axe stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. He had spoken in front of crowds before, but this felt different. Today, his words would carry weight beyond just this room. They would be broadcasted across the country. He looked out at the crowd and smiled. "I want to start by telling you a story," Jack said, his voice carrying across the square. "It's a story not about success, but about hope. A story that starts with a man who had lost everything, not just his home, but his dignity, his belief in himself. That man was me." There was a murmur from the crowd. Jack paused, taking a moment to let the words sink in. "When I first started this program, I wasn't trying to fix homelessness. I was trying to fix a broken system that ignored the humanity of those who were homeless. I didn't realize it at the time, but what I was really doing was searching for a way to restore people's hope. You see, Homelessness is not just about a lack of shelter. It's about the loss of connection, the loss of community, the loss of dignity. Jack's voice softened, as if speaking to someone personally. What I found, though, is that when you give people a chance, when you give them a safe space to rebuild, to dream, to connect, you don't just help them survive. You help them thrive. He paused again, scanning the faces in the crowd. I'm standing here today because of the stories I've heard. Stories of families reunited, people overcoming addiction, and individuals finding their way back to jobs and homes. But more than that, stories of people rediscovering their purpose. Jack gestured toward the expansive skyline in front of him. This city has been a place of opportunity for many, but it's also a place where homelessness is a daily reality. It's not just a Los Angeles problem, it's a national problem. But today, I'm not here to tell you about the problem. I'm here to tell you about the solution. The crowd leaned in, and Jack continued, his energy building. Today, we launch a new initiative. The homeless empowerment movement is not just about giving people shelter. It's about giving them the tools to build a new life. It's about restoring what was lost: dignity, purpose, community. It's about empowering people to take ownership of their futures and, most importantly, to believe that they deserve a future. As Jack spoke, the energy in the crowd shifted. There was a palpable sense of hope, of collective responsibility. We are creating a new way forward, Jack said. A way that combines technology, local leadership, and most importantly, compassion. Together, we will build a system that doesn't just treat the symptoms of homelessness but addresses the root causes. And we're not doing it alone. We're doing it with all of you. Every volunteer, every donor, every local leader, and every person who has ever been part of this program, you are the heart of this movement. As Jack concluded his speech, the applause was overwhelming. He felt a sense of accomplishment and pride, but also a deep awareness of the road ahead. This launch was a symbol of a larger movement, one that was still in its early stages, but with enormous potential. After the event, Jack spent the next few weeks crisscrossing the country, visiting the different communities where the homeless empowerment movement was taking root. From the streets of Philadelphia to the bustling neighborhoods of San Francisco, he saw firsthand how local leaders were taking ownership of the program and making it their own. Each city had its own unique challenges, but the underlying theme was the same. The more community-driven the solutions, the more sustainable the impact. Whether it was a job training program in Michigan, a mental health outreach initiative in rural Texas, or a housing-first model in Atlanta, the program was being adapted to meet the specific needs of each community. One afternoon, Jack sat in a cafe in Denver, looking over a report detailing the progress of the program. The numbers were impressive. Homelessness was down by 22% in the areas where the initiative had been implemented. But even more impressive were the stories of individual transformation. People who had moved from shelters into permanent homes, who had found jobs, and who were now giving back by mentoring others. These were the stories that mattered. These were the stories that Jack carried with him as he continued to push forward. Back at the headquarters in Los Angeles, Claire, Jack, and their team were deep in a strategy meeting. They had built a foundation, but there was still so much to do. The program was growing, and with it came new challenges. They needed to refine their methods, streamline their operations, and ensure that the initiative remained true to its mission as it scaled. Jack, we're seeing incredible results in the cities we've worked in, Claire said, looking at the latest data. But we've also encountered some challenges in areas where local governments haven't fully bought in yet. We need to step up our advocacy efforts and ensure that the political landscape shifts along with us. Jack nodded. We're going to need to create more partnerships with local governments. They're crucial in making this work. But we also need to focus on making the program as self-sustaining as possible, especially in the early stages of implementation. They discussed strategies for securing additional funding, building long-term partnerships with businesses, and strengthening relationships with local governments. Jack knew that to make this movement a lasting success, they had to continue innovating, collaborating, and expanding their network of support. As Jack reflected on the progress they had made, he thought back to the pivotal moment when he first partnered with Elon Musk. It had seemed like a long shot, but now, looking at the ripple effect they had created, he realized how far they had come. They had built more than just a program. They had created a movement. a movement that not only tackled homelessness but also inspired a new generation of activists, leaders, and innovators to believe that the biggest challenges could be solved with compassion, community, and collaboration. And that movement was only just beginning. As Jack sat alone in his office late one evening, looking out at the city, he reflected on how much had changed. The man who had once been homeless was now leading a movement that was changing the lives of thousands. It wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about restoring humanity, dignity, and hope. In the distance, the sun was setting over Los Angeles, casting a golden glow on the horizon. It was a new dawn, and Jack knew that the best was yet to come. What do you think is the most important step in solving homelessness? How can we ensure that communities take ownership of the solutions in a way that is sustainable and impactful? Share your thoughts with us below.